Of course, Naira replied nonchalantly, crossing her arms. They told me that because our bodies are a mix of different blood types like beast blood, human blood, synthetic blood, and so on, it's impossible. Apparently, if we shared our blood with someone, it'd probably kill them. Something about compatibility, or whatever. She paused, rubbing the back of her head sheepishly. Honestly, I stopped paying attention after they said it was impossible. Lyra let out a small hum, tilting her head in thought. I see, I'll have to ask them about it later. She glanced around the battlefield, gesturing to the debris and smoldering destruction surrounding the facility. So, what now? What are we going to do with all this mess? Naira stretched her arms over her head, letting out a dramatic yawning. Well, the Mauler's done wrecking stuff. The Blood Legion is mopping up the leftovers, and I've got a new pet over here. So, I say we leave the cleanup to everyone else and go grab a drink. Lyra narrowed her eyes. Seriously? Do you even understand the kind of disaster we're going to have to explain to Master Cleo when she sees this mess? The entire facility is in ruins. Naira grinned, unfazed. Oh, come on. Master Cleo expects this kind of chaos when we're involved. Besides, it's not that bad. She gestured toward the carnage, where half the facility lay in smoldering ruins, corpses, and shattered equipment littering the battlefield. Okay, maybe it's a little bad, but still, we got the job done, didn't we? Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose, muttering under her breath, I swear, you're impossible. She glanced toward the unconscious Gustav and sighed. Fine, but what are we going to do with him? Naira's grin widened. Oh, that's easy. We patch him up, chain him up, and bring him back to the underground city. Once he wakes up, we explain the new terms of his life. You work for us now. Simple, right? Lyra stared at her sister, unimpressed. And if he refuses? Naira's grin turned sharp. Then I'll remind him who saved his sorry hide. Trust me, he'll fall in line. The two sisters stared at each other for a moment before Lyra sighed again, shaking her head. Fine. Let's wrap this up before it gets worse. With that, the twins turned back toward the battlefield. The Blood Legion units were already securing the perimeter around the facility. The chaos was finally settling, but they both knew the real challenge would come later. Explaining this disaster to Cleo. Think she'll let us off the hook this time? Naira asked as they walked. Lyra gave her a flat look. Not a chance. While the twins were busy arguing about how to come up with an excuse to avoid the beating Cleo would undoubtedly give them once she saw the catastrophic mess they'd left behind, Lila and her brother quietly approached. What a beautiful sunrise we have today, don't you think so? Lila's voice was soft and weak, but it still carried its usual charm, her words floating on the cool morning air. Naira turned to face her while raising an eyebrow. Oh, Lila, it seems you made it just in time. But, what happened to you? You look awful and, well, totally pale. Lila chuckled faintly as she moved toward them, her steps slow and deliberate. I don't want to hear that from someone who's even paler than I am, Naira, she replied, her tone light despite the clear exhaustion in her face. She lowered herself onto a chunk of rubble, a piece of the shattered wall nearby, and leaned back slightly, letting the morning breeze wash over her face. So, is everything done? She asked while closing her eyes as if savoring the rare moment of peace. Lyra stepped forward, glancing at the ruined battlefield around them. Yeah, it's over. All that's left is for you to call in your troops to clean up the remaining Nexum forces. Just a bunch of cannon fodder, nothing too dangerous. As she spoke, Lyra reached into her jacket and pulled out a small bag filled with an assortment of chocolates she always carried with her. It was a habit she'd picked up from dealing with her overly dramatic sister during their downtime. Offering the bag to Lila, Lyra gave her a tired but sincere smile. Do you want some? They're chocolates. Helps with the exhaustion. Lila tilted her head slightly, then reached out to feel the bag. She plucked a couple of chocolates from it and placed them in her hand. They're delicious indeed, she said after popping one into her mouth. She turned and extended the bag toward her brother. Would you like one, brother? He declined with a simple shake of his head, but he smiled slightly at the gesture. Brother, Lila said, her tone suddenly firm. Go call the troops. Have them begin clearing the area and searching for any enemy survivors. If they find any, offer them a chance to surrender. there's been enough bloodshed today. Her brother gave a quick nod and stepped away, pulling out his communicator as he began issuing orders to their forces. As he walked off, Lila sighed softly, relaxing further against the rubble. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of ash and burnt machinery from the battlefield. So, Lila said while tilting her head toward the twins, since everything's over now, you'll follow the arrangement, right? She opened her gray eyes and stared into the endless sky, her gaze distant yet calm. Of course, Lyra said confidently, plopping herself down on Naira's lap as if the morning wasn't drenched in the aftermath of destruction. The humans will take over all Nexum facilities on this planet. And in exchange, you'll pay us 20% of your earnings every month. That was the deal, and we'll honor it. Naira, half-heartedly pushing Lyra off her legs, added, and don't worry about us backing out of the deal. A contract is a contract. Lila tilted her head again. And what happens if the allied fleets of the mega-corporations return to attack us? What then? Her tone was calm, but there was a hint of curiosity behind her question. Before the twins could answer, a playful, almost sing-song voice came from behind Lila. Ah, don't worry about that. The voice chimed, smooth as silk and laced with mischief. My mother took care of that little detail. None of them made it back. The twins immediately froze, their bodies tensing as the voice registered in their ears. They exchanged wide-eyed glances, their playful attitudes vanishing in an instant. Wise, Naira blurted out, instinctively reaching for her weapon, though she didn't draw it. Lyra, still seated, straightened herself, her usual composure faltering as her hands twitched toward her pistols. You've been here this whole time? Lila, however, remained completely calm, her serene expression unchanging. I was wondering when you were going to say something, she said while tilting her head slightly toward the source of the voice. There was a faint shimmer in the air behind Lila, like light bending around an invisible figure. Then, slowly, a small woman emerged from invisibility, her figure materializing with an almost ghostly grace. She was as petite as she was radiant, with shimmering light green hair that fell in delicate waves down her back. Her mischievous green eyes sparkled like emeralds, and her smile was sharp and teasing, like a cat toying with its prey. She leaned over Lila's shoulder, her arms wrapped around the Saintess in a loose hug. Are you sure you're blind? Wise purred, tilting her head playfully as she nuzzled her cheek against Lila's. Everyone says you are, but I think you've been fooling them this whole time. You see far more than you let on, don't you? The twins watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to react to the sight of Wise casually draping herself over Lila like they were old friends. Lila remained calm with her expression unchanging. If you're trying to provoke me, it's not going to work, she said simply. But if you're here, then I suppose you've already handled the fleets? Wise giggled softly, pulling back slightly but keeping her arms around Lila's shoulders. Oh, you could say that. Mother doesn't like loose ends, so she made sure none of the megacorp fleets ever got the chance to retreat. Let's just say the reinforcements are going to be very late. Her tone was light, but the undertone of malice was unmistakable. Naira, finally snapping out of her stunned silence, frowned deeply. And what are you doing here, Wise? Shouldn't you be off causing chaos somewhere else? Wise glanced at Naira with a sly grin. Oh, I was curious about how you two were handling things, of course. And, well. Her gaze flicked to the destruction around the facility, the scorched ruins and bloodied ground. Let's just say you didn't disappoint. It's such a lovely mess you've made. Lyra sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. We're going to hear about this from Master Cleo later, aren't we? Wise laughed, releasing Lila and stretching lazily. Oh, without a doubt, but don't worry too much. You've still got me on your side, after all. The twins exchanged a weary glance. The day wasn't even over, and yet the aftermath was already shaping up to be just as chaotic as the battle itself. Orbiting the planet Hanurix, the once mighty Allied fleet lay in ruins, reduced to little more than drifting debris. Massive chunks of twisted metal floated aimlessly through the void, the remnants of once proud supercapital ships that had stood as the pride of the Allied forces. Fires burned silently in the vacuum of space, and faint explosions rippled through the scattered wreckage as surviving ammunition stores detonated sporadically. Here and there, small pockets of resistance could still be seen from desperate survivors aboard broken frigates and escape pods clinging to life, firing their last futile shots at the overwhelming enemy. But the sheer number of the Chrysari swarms, the relentless biomechanical horrors birthed by the hive minds, made resistance an exercise in futility. The swarms moved with terrifying coordination, overwhelming even the smallest pockets of survivors. Their smaller vessels darted like ravenous insects, while their larger, grotesque dreadnought-class organisms loomed ominously, tearing through what remained of the Allied fleet with horrifying efficiency. The survivors' cries for help and last-ditch efforts to fight back amounted to nothing. It was no longer a battle, it was a slow, inevitable slaughter. Farther out, the supercapital-class ships of the hive minds floated like monstrous gods, their organic metallic hulls pulsing faintly with a sinister glow. These titanic vessels, forged in the unfathomable depths of the hive's biomechanical forges, had utterly obliterated the Allied supercapitals in a battle that could only be described as one-sided carnage. The Allied fleet, despite its size and advanced technology, had been no match for the hive's relentless onslaught. The hive mind's ability to adapt and overwhelm its enemies with sheer numbers and evolving tactics had turned the tide of the battle before it even began. It was not a question of if the Allied fleet would lose, but when. And now, at 6:55 a.m. on the year 5608 of the Imperial Galactic System, that question had been answered. Inside the control chamber of the hive capital organism, an eerie biomechanical room lit by pulsating veins of green and blue bioluminescence, a transmission echoed through the organic walls. Less than the complete annihilation of the Allied fleet has been confirmed. There were no survivors, greater than. The voice was cold and emotionless, transmitted directly into the neural network of the subconscious mind. It wasn't spoken in words so much as it was felt. A thought passed from one node of the hive to another, cascading across the collective consciousness like a ripple through still water. One of the hive mind's overseer organisms, a grotesque fusion of flesh, metal, and glowing neural tissue hovered within the chamber. Its multitude of eyes blinked in unison as it absorbed the report. It reached out with a biomechanical limb to interact with the pulsating control interface, sending confirmation signals back through the swarm's vast network. The overseer emitted a low, guttural hum, a soundless command picked up by the countless swarms still devouring the last remnants of the Allied fleet. Aboard the remaining debris field, the survivors, those unlucky enough to have lived through the initial slaughter, were swiftly being hunted down. Escape pods drifted aimlessly, their distress beacons pinging futilely into the void. One by one, the Chrysari hunters latched onto them, their razor-sharp appendages tearing through the hulls with terrifying ease. Inside, terrified crew members screamed as the hunters ripped them apart, their final moments lost to the cold emptiness of space. The small frigates and corvettes, with their engines flickering with the last power reserves, attempted desperate evasive maneuvers. Some even fired their remaining weapons at the advancing swarm. But their attacks were pitiful against the sheer number and size of the Chrysari ships. A lone Allied battleship, its once mighty hull torn and blackened, let out one last barrage of plasma cannons in a defiant stand against the hive mind's forces. The shots struck one of the hive's dreadnought organisms, causing minor damage. But the retaliation was swift and brutal. The dreadnought's massive tendrils lashed out, wrapping around the battleship and crushing it like a child snapping a twig. Within moments, the ship exploded in a silent burst of fire and debris, its crew and hope extinguished in an instant. Back on the hive capital organism, the overseer continued to monitor the swarm's progress. Its grotesque form pulsated slightly as it relayed new orders. Less than all remaining debris is to be harvested. Biological material is to be extracted and stored. Organic survivors are no longer necessary. Terminate them. Greater than. The command spread across the swarm like wildfire, and the Chrysari hunters and ships moved with renewed purpose. The hive wasted nothing. Every scrap of metal, every drop of biological matter, and every flicker of data would be collected and repurposed. This was the way of the hive mind. Nothing was left behind. Within the next hour, there would be no trace of the Allied fleet left in orbit, no survivors, no wreckage, no memory of the once proud armada that had dared to challenge the hive. The only thing that remained was silence. on one of Nexum Dynamics' most luxurious paradise worlds, nestled within the heart of a verdant garden estate, Viceroy Pax was indulging in his evening snack party. The setting was decadent, crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over marble floors, exotic music played in the background, and the air was thick with the scent of rare alien flowers and gourmet delicacies. Pax was a towering humanoid octopus with shimmering blue skin, slicked back hair, and a sharp suit, and face tentacles that twitched with subtle movements, sat at the head of the grand dining table, surrounded by his closest inner circle. The Viceroy was in high spirits while sipping a rare wine extracted from an extinct fruit species while delicately nibbling on a glowing bioluminescent delicacy. His face tentacles twitched with delight as he entertained his guests with stories of his recent triumphs. Suddenly, one of his servants, a slender, nervous individual with pale skin, stepped into the room and leaned down to whisper something into Pax's ear. The Viceroy's tentacles froze mid-movement, his glowing eyes narrowing. Then, with a forced smile, he stood, raising his glass. "Gentlemen," he announced with a theatrical flourish, "it seems an urgent matter has arisen that requires my immediate attention. I trust you will continue to enjoy the drinks and the feast I have so generously prepared for you." He extended his arms in a gesture of magnanimity, as though dismissing himself from the table was a gift to his guests. The attendees murmured their assurances, bowing slightly in respect as Pax left the room with his servant trailing behind him. Once inside the privacy of his lavish office, Pax dropped his facade. He stepped toward his desk, retrieving a peculiar item from a gilded container. It looked like a cigar, but instead of dried leaves, its casing was filled with a shimmering jelly-like substance that swirled hypnotically. Pax placed the cigar-like object to his lips and took a long, deliberate inhale, the jelly glowing faintly as he did. A minute later, he exhaled, releasing a cloud of iridescent smoke that lingered in the air, making his face tentacles shiver with pleasure. Satisfied, he reclined into his custom-made chair, its cushions adjusting perfectly to his form. His glowing eyes locked onto the servant. "Now," he began, his tone smooth yet cold, "tell me in detail what has occurred." The servant swallowed nervously, bowing his head as he summoned several holographic screens in mid-air. Each screen displayed reports, visuals, and sensor data from the Nexum facility in question. "Understood, Lord Pax," the servant began. "As I mentioned earlier, one of our facilities in the commercial world, designated Hanurix, was attacked a few days ago. We've since lost all communication with them. There's been no response to any of our attempts to re-establish contact." Pax lazily waved his hand as if swatting away a fly, scrolling through the holographic displays with apparent disinterest. The screens showed the aftermath of the battle, the ruined structures, burning debris, and extensive signs of combat. But Pax barely glanced at it. "I don't see the issue here," Pax said with his voice laced with disdain. "Send the defensive fleet in that sector to eliminate the offenders. That's why they exist, is it not? Don't waste my time with trivialities." His glowing eyes shifted to the servant, now burning with a faint but unmistakable killing intent. Pax's hatred for wasted time was legendary since he viewed it as the most unforgivable of offenses. The servant stammered, beads of sweat forming on his pale forehead. "Oh, of course not, my lord. There's more to it than that." He bowed deeply, trembling as he continued. "The issue is, we've also lost contact with the defensive fleet in that sector." Pax's tentacles twitched in irritation, but the servant's words had caught his attention. His demeanor shifted from annoyance to curiosity while he leaned forward slightly, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Interesting. If I'm not mistaken, the Allied fleet is stationed in that region as well. What's the status of their forces?" The servant hesitated, fumbling with his holopad as he tried to find the relevant information. We've received no communication from them either, my lord. All attempts to contact them have also failed. Their last report came in shortly before we lost contact with the region entirely." Pax frowned, with his interest now fully piqued. With a flick of his hand, he summoned a larger holographic screen in front of him and began pulling up live news feeds, scanning for any reports from the Hanurix sector. As the feeds loaded, his face darkened. There was nothing, no updates, no chatter, no signs of life from one of the busiest sectors under his control. "Show me their last report," Pax demanded, extending his hand impatiently. The servant quickly transferred the report to Pax's screen. A smaller holographic display appeared before the Viceroy, detailing the Allied fleet's final communication. The report began as a standard transmission, showing the commanding officer of the Allied fleet standing aboard his flagship. The background noise suggested urgency but no immediate panic. "This is Admiral Voss of the Allied fleet," the officer said, his tone brisk but composed. "We've encountered unexpected resistance in the Hanurix sector. Enemy forces are, unlike anything we've encountered before, requesting reinforcements immediately." The transmission glitched briefly, and when it resumed, the tone of the broadcast had shifted drastically. Alarms blared in the background, and the Admiral's face was pale with his composure slipping. "Hostile forces are too numerous. They've broken through our defensive line. By the stars, what are these things? They're not." The signal faltered and was replaced by a cacophony of white noise. When it continued once more, the feed was in disarray. It was filled with screams and the sounds of combat. The Admiral had reappeared, this time with blood on his face and sparks flying behind him. "Do not send reinforcements. I repeat, do not." The dark screen announced the end of the transmission with startling suddenness. Pax sat back in his chair, his face unreadable as the hologram dissolved. His tentacles twitched faintly, betraying his growing irritation. "Well," he said after a moment, his tone deceptively calm, "it seems this is no ordinary rebellion." "My lord, what should we do?" the servant asked hesitantly. Pax exhaled deeply, the iridescent smoke from his cigar-like object swirling around his head. "Contact High Command. Request immediate intelligence on the status of the Hanurix sector. And send word to the nearest remaining fleets. I want this situation contained immediately. If reinforcements are needed, pull them from other sectors." The servant bowed deeply. "At once, my lord." As the servant scurried out of the room, Pax leaned back in his chair, his glowing eyes narrowing as he gazed out the window at the Paradise World's serene landscape. "Whatever this is," he murmured to himself, "I'll make sure it doesn't disrupt my schedule." His tentacles twitched as a dark grin spread across his face. Several months had passed since the infamous Battle of Nakor, where humanity had achieved the unthinkable, the conquest of facilities owned by Nexum Dynamics, one of the galaxy's most powerful megacorporations. The news spread like wildfire across the planet and beyond, leaving the nearby sectors stunned. Since no one could believe it, the human race, those fragile creatures that no one had even considered valuable enough to purchase as slaves for labor, had now seized a piece of the galaxy's most powerful economic empire. For centuries, humans had been regarded as the weakest of the slave races, too physically frail to mine the harsh asteroid fields, too biologically fragile for frontline war service. The only purpose they had served was as entertainment for the depraved or as disposable test subjects for medical experiments. But now, the same, weak, humans had defeated a military force owned by Nexum Dynamics, a feat no one had expected, let alone believed possible. For some, this was a cause for awe. Whispers spread across the sectors about the humans' newfound strength and cunning. Rumors flew that they had developed some kind of miracle technology or that they had allied with forces even the megacorporations feared. For others, however, it was seen as foolishness. History has proven time and time again that taking a megacorporation's facility was the easy part. The hard part was keeping it. Retaliation from a megacorp was always swift and brutal, delivered with overwhelming force. Those who defied them often vanished without a trace, their names erased from history, their stories forgotten. But months passed, and the facilities remained under human control. In one of the converted administrative buildings, now headquarters for the human forces, Saintess Lila sat quietly in her chambers. The room was modestly decorated, reflecting her calm and serene personality. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the soft white of her robes. A light knock on the door broke the silence. "Enter," Lila said with her voice as calm and inviting as always. One of her newly appointed maids stepped inside, bowing deeply before walking toward Lila. In her hands, she carried a small, white robotic bird. Its sleek design gleamed faintly. "Saintess," the maid began, her tone formal and reverent, "we have received a cryptic message from the underworld city." She held the bird forward carefully, offering it to Lila. Lila tilted her head slightly. "A message from the city?" She took the bird delicately into her hands, its smooth metallic surface cool against her fingers. The bird chirped softly before scanning Lila's face. A faint blue light swept across her features, and after a moment, the bird's beak clicked open. Less than face features confirmed, releasing message content. The bird's mechanical voice was followed by a brief pause, and then a new voice began to play. It was soft, cute, and almost childlike. It was unmistakably the voice of Wise, the mischievous enigma who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. Hello, is this recording already? How'd I even know when this thing is recording? Wise's voice filled the room, carrying her usual playful tone. Wise, if you don't know how to use it, let me do it, another voice interrupted. This one was charming and familiar. Lila immediately recognized it as one of the twins, though she couldn't tell whether it was Naira or Lyra. After all, their voices were nearly identical. Shish. Let me do it, Wise replied, sounding as though she was pouting. I already won the game, so my words are absolute for 24 hours. You have to obey me, ha ha ha. That doesn't count, a third voice chimed in, this one brimming with indignation. It was clear you were cheating. Ha. Stop being a sore loser, Wise snapped back, her tone filled with mockery. You keep saying I was cheating, but you never give proof that I did. The argument quickly devolved into chaotic bickering, with Wise and one of the twins going back and forth in an endless cycle of accusations and deflections. You two, stop it, the bird is recording all of this. The other twin's voice broke in, exasperated. The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard in the background before the message abruptly cut off. Less than end of the first recorded message. You still have one message left. Do you wish to hear it? The little bird's beak clicked shut as it finished speaking, its mechanical eyes blinking innocently. The room fell silent. Lila sat perfectly still, the red flush on her ears betraying the embarrassment she felt. Her normally calm demeanor wavered ever so slightly. This was not the kind of message she had expected. The maids standing nearby fidgeted awkwardly, unsure of how to react. They looked everywhere but at Lila, clearly feeling as though they had overheard something they shouldn't have. One maid bit her lip, trying to suppress the urge to giggle, while another looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. For her part, Lila simply cleared her throat, placing the bird down gently on her desk. Well, she said softly, her voice regaining its usual composure, though her bright red ears betrayed her lingering embarrassment. It seems they were quite busy. She reached out to the bird again but hesitated, her fingers hovering over its smooth metallic surface. Should I even listen to the next message? She murmured to herself, her expression thoughtful. The maids glanced at each other but said nothing. After a long pause, Lila let out a soft sigh, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. Go on, she said to the bird. The little robotic creature clicked its beak, preparing to play the next message. The robotic bird chirped softly as it prepared to play the second message. Lila, already bracing herself after the first chaotic recording, leaned back in her chair with a small sigh. The maids, who had been silently pretending not to exist after the previous awkwardness, stole curious glances at the bird, wondering what fresh chaos was about to unfold. The bird's beak clicked open, and the recording began. Lyra, are you sure the first message was deleted? Wise with her familiar childlike voice asked, her tone a mix of suspicion and impatience. I'm sure. Probably, Lyra's voice replied, sounding equally impatient. Anyway, just say it correctly this time, I don't want to delete it again. You didn't delete it at all, Lila thought to herself, her expression remaining calm, though a faint sigh escaped her lips. There was a pause, followed by the sound of someone clearing their throat dramatically. Ehem, well then, little Lila, Wise began, her voice filled with pride. I have come bearing good news, bad news, and probably a gray one. Which one do you want to hear first? Wise, you know she can't see you, right? One of the twins interrupted, her voice laced with exasperation. Stop making those weird poses. And you also need to know this is just a voice recording. There's no interactive interface, the other twin added, her tone equally unimpressed. A long silence followed. These little. Ys's voice trailed off, and then the sound of chaos erupted in the background. Thuds, muffled cries, and the distinct sound of someone's suffering could be heard as Wise presumably educated her companions. Lila's brow twitched slightly. The faint redness in her ears was starting to creep back as the maids exchanged awkward glances again, unsure whether to laugh or continue pretending they hadn't heard anything. After a few minutes of background discipline, YS's voice returned, sounding far too cheerful for the situation. Ehem, now that my two servants have been properly educated, we can finally talk in peace. All right, Wise continued. Let's start with the bad news. The Megacorp is still sending spies, pirates, and mercenary fleets to attack you guys every so often. They're annoying, but, well, that's what Megacorps do. Lila's expression darkened slightly, her gray eyes narrowing as she processed this information. Now for the gray news. My aunt is taking care of them for now, yay. But she said she's keeping all the loot as payment. There's nothing I can do about it since, well, my aunt is super scary. Despite the ominous nature of the news, YS's childlike voice made the remark oddly adorable. Lila couldn't help but let out a small sigh, her lips curling ever so slightly into a faint smile. And now, YS's voice perked up, brimming with excitement. For the good news. Rex finally woke up, and he's calling for you. That's it, see you. Wait, Lila wanted to say something, but the recording kept going. In the background, YS's voice could still be heard shouting, "Hey, you two! How long are you going to lie faint on the ground? Wake up already." The next few minutes were filled with bizarre background noises. Thumps, muffled protests, and what sounded suspiciously like the twins groaning in pain filled the recording. Occasionally, Wise could be heard giving orders or taunting the pair with funny remarks. "Stop kicking me, Wise, that's what you get for calling me short. This is abuse. I'm telling Rex. No one will believe you, Lyra. Naira, wake up and help me, I'd rather die here." Finally, after several more minutes of incoherent chaos, the message cut off with a faint click as someone finally turned it off. Less than end of the second recorded message. The bird clicked its beak shut, returning to its neutral, inanimate state. The room was once again enveloped in silence. The maids stared at Lila cautiously, waiting for her reaction. One of them bit her lip, clearly struggling not to laugh, while another busied herself tidying up an already spotless shelf to avoid making eye contact. Lila sat perfectly still, her face calm and serene as usual, but her slightly trembling hands betrayed the faint frustration she was trying to suppress. Her ears, now fully red, twitched slightly. After a moment she let out a long, measured sigh. "I see. Wise hasn't changed at all," she murmured, her voice soft but resigned. One of the braver maids stepped forward. "Saintess, should we prepare a response?" Lila shook her head, rubbing her temples as if trying to banish the lingering echoes of YS's antics from her mind. "No, I'll deal with them later." The maid bowed and stepped back, but another one hesitated before asking, The good news, Saintess. Should we prepare for your departure?" Lila nodded slightly with her composure returning. "Yes, notify my brother and the council. If Rex is awake, then it's time we meet him again." She paused, her gray eyes drifting toward the window. "And I'll need to have a long talk with Wise and the twins about how to properly send a message." The maids bowed and quickly left the room, leaving Lila alone with the robotic bird. She glanced at it, her lips curling into a faint smile despite herself. "Rex, awake," she whispered to herself, a flicker of hope and determination glimmering in her usually calm expression. Lila walked gracefully through the corridors of the flagship, her golden hair flowing gently behind her. She was flanked by her maids and a group of elite female Templars, their presence commanding respect and awe. These Templars were her personal guard, the most loyal and skilled warriors in the human army, sworn to protect her at all costs. Unlike the standard black and red power armor worn by most Templars, Lila's guards donned white and red power armor, symbolizing their elevated status as the Saintess's protectors. The distinct armor not only marked their authority but also served as a warning to others: insult them, and you insult the Saintess herself. As the group moved through the polished halls of the ship, soldiers and crew members stopped in their tracks, saluting with solemn reverence as Lila passed by. Her presence was almost ethereal, her serene expression and radiant aura commanding respect without a single word. After a few minutes, Lila and her entourage reached the meeting room, a vast chamber with a large round table at its center. The captains of the other destroyers in the fleet were already present, their faces a mix of anticipation and professionalism. Some were physically seated at the table, while others appeared as 4D holograms, their forms flickering faintly as they joined remotely from distant ships. The moment Lila entered the room, every individual present stood from their seats and saluted her in unison. Their salute was one Lila herself had designed. It was a gesture of devotion and unity. They placed their hands over their hearts, their fingers spread wide to resemble wings, a symbol of the hope and faith humanity now carried under her leadership. "We greet the Holy Maiden," they all said in perfect unison, their voices echoing throughout the chamber. Lila nodded graciously, her golden hair shimmering under the room's soft lighting. "Good work, everyone. You may take your seats," she said while gesturing gently with her hand. Her voice was calm, melodious, and carried the warmth of a leader who truly cared for her people. The captains sat down with their eyes fixed on her as they awaited her words. "So," began one of the captains, a tall man with piercing blue eyes and an expression that betrayed his admiration for Lila, "to what do we owe the honor of your presence today, Holy Maiden?" His voice was polite, but the undertone of personal interest was clear. It was no secret among the fleet that he harbored deeper feelings for her, though Lila remained oblivious, or chose to ignore it. Lila's gaze swept across the room as she spoke. "I have received a message from our allies. The angel has awakened." Her voice was calm, but the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Murmurs immediately erupted around the table. The name, Angel, carried significant weight among the humans since it was a being both revered and feared, someone who represented power and hope but also mystery and uncertainty. One of the holographic captains leaned forward, his digital projection flickering slightly. "Can we see the message, Holy Maiden?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. Sharing important messages was a standard practice during meetings, especially when it came to matters of such importance. But this message was far from standard. Lila hesitated, her composure momentarily faltering. Her ears, already red with embarrassment, were thankfully hidden by the golden waves of her hair. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment, her voice remaining steady despite her shame. "The message was a one-time use. I no longer have it." A few captains exchanged glances, surprised but not questioning her further. Still, Lila could feel the weight of their curiosity, and she silently cursed Wise and the twins for the chaos they had caused with their recording. Clearing her throat, Lila quickly redirected the conversation. "I think we've strayed slightly from the main topic," she said with her serene tone, reasserting control over the room. "The reason I've called this meeting is to discuss two important matters: the full assault on the oceanic world and the ongoing efforts to secure and expand the facilities on Nakor." She paused for a moment, allowing the murmurs to settle. Then, with a graceful wave of her hand, one of her Templars stepped forward. The Templar placed a small device in the center of the table, and within seconds, several holoscreens sprang to life, displaying footage of Rex during his infamous battle on the oceanic world. The footage showed Rex locked in combat with a massive aquatic beast, his movements precise and ferocious as he wielded weapons of immense power. The battle was both brutal and awe-inspiring, the kind of fight that seemed ripped from legend. But as the footage progressed, it became clear that Rex's victory had come at great cost. Both he and the beast had inflicted devastating damage on each other, and the final moments of the battle showed the two collapsing into the ocean together, one dead and the other heavily injured. The room fell silent as the footage ended. Lila's gray eyes scanned the captains' faces, searching for their reactions. "And so," she said softly, "I want to hear everyone's opinions about the angel." One of the destroyer captains, a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his cheek, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "If I'm being honest," he began, his voice blunt but respectful, "this angel you speak of doesn't seem as impressive as the stories claim." Gasps echoed from a few captains, but the man continued, unfazed. "Yes, it's true that he fought that beast head-on, and I'll admit that's no small feat. But in the end, the result was a draw. They took each other out. I don't see how that qualifies him as the savior some of you claim him to be." Another captain, a younger man with fiery red hair, immediately countered. That's not a fair assessment, he said sharply. The fact that he could even match a creature of that size and power is proof of his strength. If anything, it shows his potential. With proper resources and recovery time, he could become the greatest weapon humanity has. The room quickly descended into debate, captains voicing their opinions both for and against Rex's importance. Lila remained silent, letting the discussion flow as she carefully observed each speaker. After a few minutes, she raised her hand, and the room fell silent once more. I understand your concerns, she said gently with her voice, cutting through the tension like a blade. And I value your opinions, but remember that the angel is more than just a warrior, he is a symbol of hope. Hope for humanity's survival and future, and whether or not you believe in his strength now, know that his return marks the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. The captains nodded solemnly, her words resonating deeply with them. Now, Lila continued, her tone steady and commanding, let us focus on the tasks at hand. The oceanic world and Nikor's facilities will be vital to our survival. We must ensure their security and efficiency, and for that, I'll need all of your cooperation. If I may ask, said one of the 4D holograms, a politician known for his sharp tongue and self-righteous demeanor. I understand the need for these facilities on the world of Nikor, but why exactly do we have to pay our so-called allies? Shouldn't they be helping us for the sake of mutual survival? It seems absurd to me that we are being taxed for what is rightfully ours. Before Lila could answer, one of the destroyer captains, a gruff man with scars across his face from years of combat, slammed his hand on the table. Because no one works for free, you pompous fool. Can't you understand something as simple as that? Would you send troops to conquer a whole facility and just gift it away without getting anything in return? Are you seriously that stupid? The politician's hologram flickered as he leaned forward, his expression turning venomous. How dare you speak to me like that, you uncivilized brute? This is precisely why muscle brains like you should not be allowed in an elegant discussion like this. You lack even the minimum education required to engage in proper discourse. Honestly, it's shocked. The destroyer captain scowled, his fists tightening as he looked ready to retort. But before the escalating argument could spiral further, Lila's calm voice cut through the tension like a blade. Stop fighting among yourselves, she said firmly, her gray eyes opening briefly and scanning the room. The entire chamber seemed to fall under her spell, her words commanding attention without the need for volume or force. If we want humanity to rise again, we must cooperate. The military and the politicians must work together, not against each other. We don't have the luxury of indulging in these petty quarrels, gentlemen. The room fell silent. Even the holograms seemed to flicker in awkward compliance, as though the light they projected felt the weight of her authority. Lila tilted her head slightly, her tone softening as she asked, "Can I take your silence as an agreement to let the assembly continue?" Both the destroyer captain and the politician bowed their heads slightly, speaking in unison. Of course, sorry for the interruption. Thank you, gentlemen, Lila said while offering a dashing, disarming smile. It was a smile that could soothe even the fiercest of storms, and it worked perfectly to settle the tension in the room. She continued with her voice as calm and melodic as ever. While the way the captain expressed himself may not have been the most appropriate, he is correct in principle. The taxes and payments our allies require are the price of the protection they provide. In exchange, they are offering defensive measures against the inevitable Nexum counterattack. With a wave of her hand, the footage of Rex's battle on the oceanic world shifted to a new set of attack reports, showing detailed logs of pirate fleets, mercenary groups, and small rogue Nexum forces that had attempted to assault the Nikor sector in the past few months. This is, one of the politicians muttered, grabbing one of the floating hollow screens and quickly scanning through the report. His eyes widened as he processed the sheer scale of the attempted attacks. How is it possible that all these forces tried to attack us, but none of them made it here, not even one? Lila's expression remained calm, but there was a slight shift in her tone, a faint edge that hinted at the gravity of what she was about to say. That's one of the topics I wanted to inform you about today. It seems that our allies have formed an agreement with the hive minds. The entire room froze for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a thundercloud about to burst. The hive minds? One of the destroyer captains repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Lila nodded. Yes. It's the hive mind swarms that have been intercepting and destroying the pirate fleets, mercenary groups, and any other forces that attempt to assault us. The information we've gathered suggests that they're working in coordination with our allies to keep this sector secure. The news hit the room like a bomb. Everyone began speaking at once, their voices filled with shock, disbelief, and confusion. How is that possible? There's no way. The hive minds don't negotiate, they only destroy everything in their path. There's never been a single report of the hive minds making deals with anyone. Can we even trust this? Our intelligence network is still limited. What if it's misinformation? Or worse, a trap? The voices overlapped, the room descending into chaos once more. The captains and politicians alike were divided. Some saw this as an unprecedented opportunity, while others saw it as a potential disaster waiting to happen. Lila raised her hand, her fingers delicate but firm, and the room slowly fell silent again. I understand your concerns, she said, her voice calm and measured. This revelation is unexpected, and we must approach it with caution. However, the facts are undeniable. Without the intervention of the hive minds, we would not be sitting here today discussing our plans for Nakor or the oceanic world. The protection they've provided has been instrumental in keeping us safe thus far. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. That being said, I agree that we must tread carefully. The hive minds are not known for their benevolence. If they've chosen to aid us, it's likely because it serves their own purposes. But for now, their actions align with our survival, and that is something we cannot afford to dismiss. The room went quiet with the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. Finally, one of the younger captains spoke up hesitantly. Do you think this alliance, if we can even call it that, is sustainable, or will the hive minds eventually turn on us? Lila's expression softened slightly, but her gray eyes remained steady. That is a question I cannot answer. But what I can say is this. Humanity must be prepared for every possibility. We will use this time to grow stronger, to solidify our defenses, and to ensure that we are not dependent on any one ally, whether it be the hive minds or anyone else. Her words were met with solemn nods from both the captains and the politicians. Lila gestured toward the reports on the holoscreens. Now, let's refocus on the task at hand. The full assault on the oceanic world and the continued development of Nakor's facilities are critical to our long-term survival. I want detailed plans from each of you on how we can ensure their success. If I may ask, Holy Maiden, the destroyer captain, who always seemed overly attentive toward Lila, spoke up, his tone deferential but carrying a hint of personal interest. Isn't the oceanic planet already under the control of a megacorporation? Lila, ever composed, nodded slightly. That is what makes this situation so intriguing, she replied, her calm, melodic voice commanding the room's attention. While it is true that the oceanic planet was once under megacorp control, shortly before the battle with the Tier 3 beast, it was sold to a ghost company. At her words, one of her maids gracefully stepped forward and adjusted the holographic device in the center of the table. The image shifted, displaying a detailed 4D hologram of the oceanic world, its shimmering blue surface dotted with swirling currents and glowing reefs. The captains and politicians exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. What you're suggesting, one of the politicians said, his voice tinged with suspicion, is that what happened to the luxury cruiser was planned by someone, and that the same party responsible for the incident also purchased the planet afterward? Precisely, Lila replied with her expression serene but with an undercurrent of sharp intelligence. The room fell silent for a moment as her words sank in. One of the maids, standing beside Lila, took a step forward and activated another hologram. This time, it displayed the Tier 3 beast Rex had fought against, alongside images of other native oceanic lifeforms. The beasts were displayed to scale, their sizes and energy requirements annotated in detail. The evidence we've gathered strongly suggests, the maid began, her voice clear and professional, that the Tier 3 beast was not a natural occurrence on the planet. For one, there was insufficient energy in the ecosystem to support such an evolution. None of the other local creatures had reached a tier or size necessary to trigger its ascension. She gestured toward the hologram, highlighting the massive size disparity between the Tier 3 beast and the largest native lifeforms. Additionally, a creature of its size would require an enormous amount of food to sustain itself. If it had been present for any significant period, it would have wiped out the planet's ecosystem within months. The data suggests it had been introduced shortly before the incident. The murmuring grew louder as the captains and politicians absorbed the implications of this revelation. So, one of the older politicians said, stroking his chin thoughtfully, "You're saying someone deliberately placed the beast on the planet?" The maid nodded. "Exactly, and it would seem they did so with a very specific purpose in mind." Another politician leaned forward, frowning. "Think about it. A luxury cruiser wouldn't knowingly visit a planet inhabited by such a dangerous creature. It would be suicide. The crew must not have known either. This whole thing, it smells of a setup." "It is as you say," Lila interjected gently, her soft voice silencing the growing chatter. The beast's presence was no accident. The timing of the sale of the planet, the appearance of the Tier 3 beast, and the subsequent destruction of the cruiser are too closely aligned to be mere coincidence. The room fell quiet again as everyone considered the implications. "And now," Lila said after a moment, her gray eyes scanning the table, "that we are all on the same page, I have a proposition to make." She allowed a slight smile to grace her lips, though her tone remained as measured and composed as ever. The captains and politicians leaned in slightly with their curiosity piqued. One of the destroyer captains cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "A proposition, Holy Maiden? If I may ask, what exactly do you have in mind?" Lila gestured to the hologram of the oceanic planet, the shimmering blue sphere spinning slowly above the table. "The oceanic world represents an opportunity. It is strategically valuable, not only for its resources but also for its location. However, its history has made it a target of interest for powerful factions. The Tier 3 beast, the mysterious sale to a ghost company, and the massacre of the cruiser all suggest that someone intended to destabilize the region." One of the politicians frowned. "And yet, after all that, the planet is still unclaimed. If someone went to such lengths, why have they abandoned it now?" "Perhaps they haven't," Lila replied, her tone steady. The younger destroyer captain, still bristling slightly from his earlier exchange with the holographic politician, leaned forward. "And what is your suggestion, Holy Maiden? Do you want us to take the planet by force?" Lila shook her head. "Not by force, no, at least, not yet. Instead, we must claim the planet with purpose. We must secure it not just militarily but also economically. Establishing our foothold there will send a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity is no longer a fragmented race of outcasts. We are organized. We are determined. And we are not afraid to take what we need to survive." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement, but one of the holographic politicians raised a hand. "Forgive me, Holy Maiden," he began, his tone cautious, "but wouldn't claiming the planet outright invite retaliation from whoever orchestrated these events? If they placed the Tier 3 beast there, surely they could launch other, less conventional attacks." "That is why we must act swiftly and decisively," Lila replied. "Our allies have already shown their ability to defend our holdings. The hive minds have intercepted every pirate, mercenary, and rogue force sent to attack us. Their assistance will ensure that no outside force can disrupt our plans on the oceanic world." The mention of the hive minds caused a ripple of unease across the room. Another destroyer captain, older and more gritty, frowned deeply. "With all due respect, Holy Maiden, relying on the hive minds is risky. They're unpredictable, and their motives are unknown. If we grow too dependent on their protection, it could lead to disaster." Lila nodded slightly, acknowledging his concern. "You're right to be cautious. The hive minds are not allies in the traditional sense. They are a force of nature, and we must never forget that. However, their interests align with ours, and we would be fools not to use this window of opportunity to strengthen ourselves." The room fell silent again as her words hung in the air. "So," Lila said with her voice softening slightly, "I propose that we begin preparations for the full reclamation of the oceanic world. We will establish a permanent human presence there, from military to economic and scientific. And we will do so while remaining vigilant for any further interference from outside forces." She looked around the room, her gray eyes meeting each captain and politician. "What do you say, gentlemen?" The murmurs of discussion began again, but this time they were more focused. The captains and politicians debated logistics, resources, and strategies, their initial hesitation slowly giving way to determination. Lila leaned back slightly, letting the discussion unfold. The pieces were falling into place, and humanity's next step was becoming clear. "Well then, ladies and gentlemen," Lila said while clapping her hands gently to regain everyone's attention. The soft sound carried weight, and the conversations in the room quickly died down as all eyes turned back to her. "It's time to talk about the most important topic at hand." Her calm, commanding presence filled the room, and even those still harboring doubts fell silent, captivated by her serene composure. "As I mentioned earlier," she continued speaking while her gray eyes scanned the faces of the council members. "I received a message, and in that message, there was an invitation for me to visit the angel." The moment the words left her lips, the room erupted into chaos. "I don't think that's prudent, holy maiden," one of the destroyer captains blurted out, his tone filled with alarm. "What if it's a trap?" Another council member, a holographic politician with a sharp, angular face, nodded in agreement. "Exactly, if they take you hostage, the damage to humanity would be immeasurable. It's too dangerous. We should stop trusting them this much," another politician exclaimed, his voice rising with panic. "We'll never know when they'll turn their attention on us and attack us outright." "And what if they're following the cabbage strategy?" one of the younger captains chimed in. When confused looks flickered across the room, he quickly clarified. "You know, when they let us grow first, carefully watering us, only to harvest us later when we're ripe. This could all be a ploy to fatten us up for the slaughter." The council room devolved into a cacophony of voices, the once structured meeting descending into chaos as everyone began arguing, this time united in their disapproval of Lila's proposed visit. The words, trap, reckless, and foolish, were thrown around freely, and accusations flew like stray bullets. Though their opinions differed on the details, one thing was clear. No one wanted Lila to go. But just as the arguments reached their peak, a thunderous voice boomed through the chamber, silencing everyone instantly. "Every one of you." The sound of someone taking air before speaking again could be heard. "Shut the fuck up." The room frozen. The air was thick with tension as all heads turned toward the source of the voice. The owner of the voice, a hologram of Madame Rose, the eldest and most influential member of the council. Even as a hologram, the force of her personality was palpable. Her stern, wrinkled face was framed by a luxurious mane of red hair, and she leaned on her iconic holographic cane, which flickered faintly with a regal golden hue. Despite her age, her voice carried the authority of a battlefield general and the sharp wit of a seasoned diplomat. For a moment, there was an awkward silence, as if the entire room held its breath. "Hold on, Madame Rose," Lila exclaimed, standing up from her seat in alarm. Her usual composure gave way to genuine concern. "Please don't exert yourself. You have to take care of your health." Madame Rose turned her holographic glare toward Lila, her cane pointing accusingly at the younger woman. "Oh, shut it, you too, girl. I'm healthier than the brains of these bastards, which are clearly full of shit." Her cane swung dramatically toward one of the politicians and one of the destroyer captains, who both looked down in shame, unable to meet her eyes. The council chamber was deadly silent now, no one daring to interrupt Madame Rose. Madame Rose, after all, was more than just an older stateswoman. She was a living legend. As the founder of the Human Council of 10, she had been instrumental in shaping the fledgling human empire after their liberation. Her personal wealth rivaled that of the galaxy's lesser nobles, and her contributions to the empire's budget accounted for nearly 50% of its total funding. But even more than her influence and wealth, she carried a secret few in the council knew. She was Lila's adoptive grandmother, a relationship that granted her immense sway even over the Holy Maiden herself. Though this fact was kept from the general populace, those within the council knew better than to challenge Madame Rose's authority. Madame Rose huffed loudly, as if daring anyone to object. "Now, where were we?" she said with her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Ah yes, the part where you're all acting like a bunch of spineless fools. Let me make this very clear. Lila will be going to meet the angel." "But, Madame Rose," one of the politicians shouted, only to be cut off by the sharp tap of her cane against the holographic floor. "Don't you, but me, you miserable idiot," Madame Rose snapped. You lot seem to forget that humanity didn't claw its way out of slavery by cowering in fear. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it could be a trap. But sitting on our asses and doing nothing is far more dangerous. Or do you all intend to keep hiding behind Lila's skirts forever? The captain she had pointed at earlier flinched as if physically struck. Madame Rose continued with her voice rising with passion. The angel is awake. And if you all had half a brain between you, you'd realize that means something is about to happen. Something big. He's not calling for Lila out of boredom. There's a reason, and she's going to find out what it is. Do I make myself clear? The council chamber was silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone like a physical force. Lila, still standing, let out a soft sigh and smiled faintly. Madame Rose, please don't scare them too much, she said gently with her tone affectionate. HMPH, if they're scared, they deserve it, Madame Rose muttered, though the corners of her mouth twitched as if suppressing a grin. She tapped her cane against the floor again. Now, unless anyone else has something stupid to say, let the girl do her job. You all love calling her your holy maiden. Let her act like one. One by one, the council members reluctantly nodded their agreement. Of course, Madame Rose, as you wish, holy maiden. Forgive us for doubting. Lila returned to her seat with her composure restored. Thank you, Madame Rose, she said softly, before turning her attention back to the council. Then it's settled. I will meet with the angel. Madame Rose smirked, her holographic image flickering slightly. Good, and girl, she added, her voice softening slightly as she addressed Lila directly. Be careful. Lila nodded, her expression serene but resolute. I will, Madame Rose. The meeting ended soon after, with the council members filing out one by one, their footsteps echoing in the chamber. Lila remained seated for a moment, gathering her composure as she watched the holographic form of Madame Rose remain behind. Child, come here for a moment, Madame Rose called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the remaining noise. Let these balls of uselessness get out first. The council members didn't dare linger, hurrying out as quickly as possible, some avoiding Madame Rose's piercing gaze as they shuffled toward the exit. Once the room was empty, Lila rose from her seat and walked over to Madame Rose, taking the chair closest to her hologram. She let out a small sigh of relief, her shoulders relaxing now that the formalities were over. Now that those sissies have finally left, Madame Rose began, her tone softening but still carrying her usual gruffness. You can drop the act too, stinky girl. With a teasing motion, she swung her holographic cane at Lila's head. Of course, the cane passed harmlessly through her, but the motion alone made Lila smile. If it weren't a hologram, Lila knew her grandmother wouldn't have actually hit her hard, but Madame Rose's gestures were always as dramatic as her words. Hee, but you're the one who told me to keep up appearances in front of others, Lila replied with a mischievous grin, leaning back slightly and letting her golden hair cascade behind her. You said it would prevent future problems. HMPH, Madame Rose scoffed, crossing her arms and trying not to let Lila's playful attitude soften her demeanor. So what, now I'm telling you to stop when we're alone, stinky girl. You're too formal, even with me, it makes me sick. Lila giggled softly and then leaned forward, resting her head on the round table as she gazed up at Madame Rose with wide, kitten-like eyes. Okay, I'll relax. But where's your favorite stinky brat? I thought you'd be scolding him by now. Madame Rose's face twitched as she tried to suppress a smile. She quickly swung her cane again, this time pointing it accusingly at Lila. Don't you start calling your brother that. HMPH, where is that stinky brat, anyway? Lila stretched her arms lazily and replied, he's busy right now, grandmother. He's commanding the troops and patrolling the new facilities. You know how much he loves bossing people around. At least he's doing something useful, Madame Rose muttered. She then shifted her posture slightly, as though preparing for something far more serious. Her holographic cane rested beside her, and her sharp gaze turned toward Lila. Now, the important question. Lila sat up straight, noticing the shift in tone while her expression became curious. What is it, grandmother? Madame Rose leaned forward dramatically, her face as serious as a war general about to deliver orders. When, she began, pausing for emphasis, are you going to get married? Lila nearly fell out of her chair, her golden hair flying as she straightened in shock. What? Marriage, grandmother, I don't have time to think about that right now, I'm way too busy. Oh, don't give me that nonsense, Madame Rose shouted, waving her cane dismissively. You're not too young. You're not too busy. And don't think I don't see through that excuse. Finding a husband while you're young is easier and better, stinky girl. Grandmother, Lila protested, her face turning bright red. She glanced toward the door as if worried her guards or maids might overhear. You can't just drop this on me like that. Madame Rose smirked, clearly enjoying her granddaughter's reaction. Don't worry, she said with a casual wave of her hand. I know you're busy, so I came prepared. Lila blinked, her confusion deepening. What do you mean, prepared? With a dramatic flourish, Madame Rose summoned several hollow screens into the air. Each one displayed a profile of a different human male, complete with names, ranks, accomplishments, and even some personality details. I've compiled a list of potential husbands for you, Madame Rose announced proudly, gesturing toward the glowing screens. All of them are outstanding gentlemen with bright futures ahead of them. Lila stared in disbelief, her face growing redder by the second. How? When did you even? Don't interrupt me, Madame Rose scolded her, clicking her cane against the holographic floor. I spent weeks compiling this list. And before you ask, yes, I made sure to include all the important factors. Factors? Lila stammered, unsure if she wanted to know. Madame Rose gave her a sly grin. Of course. You may not think about these things now, but as a woman, I know that nightly activities are crucial for a happy marriage. So I've taken that into consideration as well. Lila's jaw dropped. What? Grandmother, no, let me demonstrate, Madame Rose said cheerfully, ignoring Lila's protests. She clicked on one of the profiles. The image of a young man in a crisp military uniform filled the screen, his achievements listed beneath his stern but handsome face. This one's a captain in the fleet, Madame Rose explained. He's disciplined, well-mannered, and comes from a respectable family. But let's see what else he's got, shall we? With another click, the hollow screen shifted. The man's uniform disappeared, replaced by a fully nude image, complete with his manhood proudly standing like a monument. Grandmother, why? Lila shouted while covering her eyes with her hands as her face burned bright red. Why are you showing me this? Why are you being so shy? Madame Rose countered, grinning mischievously. You should have already given me 1 or 2 great-grandsons by now. You're wasting time. She swung her cane at Lila's head again, this time accompanied by a dramatic sigh. Grandmother, stop this madness, Lila wailed, peeking through her fingers at the hollow screens still glowing in the air. Madame Rose clicked her tongue and leaned back. HMPH. You're no fun, stinky girl. You'll thank me one day when you're old and lonely. Mark my words. Despite her embarrassment, Lila couldn't help but laugh softly at her grandmother's antics. You never change, do you, grandmother? And I never will, Madame Rose replied with a wink. After her colorful conversation with Madame Rose, Lila spent some extra time in the council room, sitting quietly as she willed her flushed face to return to its normal tone. Even though she loved her grandmother dearly, the older woman's antics always left her both embarrassed and exhausted. Finally, after about an hour, she stood and exited the room, her usual serene composure restored. Outside, her maids and guards were already waiting for her. The Templars stood stoically, their white and red armor gleaming under the artificial lights, while the maids busied themselves organizing Lila's schedule. Prepare the transport ship, we're leaving at once, Lila ordered as she walked past them. One of her guards immediately stepped aside to make the call, her tone crisp and professional as she coordinated with the crew. The others fell into step behind Lila, their formation as disciplined as ever. Meanwhile, aboard the Cleopatra, Rex was already awake and active, using the gym facilities to stretch his recovering body. He wore nothing but a pair of black workout pants as he swam laps in the enormous pool, his movements smooth and powerful. Despite the luxury of the Cleopatra's gym, Rex wasn't there for relaxation. Every stroke of his swim was calculated, testing the limits of his body as he adjusted to the changes caused by his long recovery and the enhancements he had undergone. His muscles rippled with each movement, His body a mix of organic strength and golden technological marks etched across his skin with scars of battles fought and experiments endured. As he finished another lap, Rex felt his arm device vibrating softly against his wrist. He stopped, swimming to the edge of the pool to take the call. Pressing a button on the sleek device, he answered, his deep voice resonating through the room. "Rex here. What's the situation?" "Sir, the human envoys have arrived," the familiar monotone voice of one of the bot maids replied. Rex tilted his head slightly, his golden eyes narrowing in thought. "Are they all right?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, though still calm. "They're unharmed and awaiting instructions," the bot maid confirmed. "Good. Bring them to the pool. I'll meet them here. After all, we're not strangers," Rex said with a faint smile appearing at the corner of his lips before he ended the call. Without wasting time, he pushed off the edge of the pool and resumed swimming, the sound of water breaking around him echoing softly in the vast gym. Back in the transport ship, Lila and her entourage followed one of the bot maids who had come to escort them. The bot's movements were smooth and precise, its elegant frame a testament to the advanced technology aboard the Cleopatra. As they walked, one of Lila's maids leaned in close, whispering nervously, "Saintess, did I hear correctly? They're meeting us in a pool?" Lila sighed softly. Her gray eyes remained closed as she answered, "I will say this only once. Try not to make rude remarks while you're here. The machines aboard this ship are fiercely loyal to their leader, and they won't forgive you for insulting him, even unintentionally. Be careful of your tongues." The maid nodded quickly, her face pale as she straightened her posture. The group continued in silence. The soft hum of Cleopatra's systems was the only sound as the bot maid led them through gleaming halls and automated doors. When they finally arrived at the gym, the doors slid open to reveal the vast space dominated by the massive pool. The water shimmered under the soft lighting, casting faint reflections onto the walls. But at first glance, the pool seemed empty. "Are you sure he's here?" one of the maids asked hesitantly while glancing around the room. The bot maid didn't answer with words. Instead, it raised a metallic finger and pointed toward the pool's metallic stairs, where small ripples could be seen disturbing the water. Everyone turned their gaze toward the stairs with curiosity mixed with unease. Moments later, a figure began to emerge from the water. At first, they couldn't make out much from the broad outline of someone rising slowly while the water cascaded down the figure's body as they stepped closer to the edge. The first detail they noticed was his height, since he was tall, easily over 2 meters, and his imposing presence was amplified by his silence. His long black hair clung to his face and shoulders, obscuring his features but giving him an almost ethereal, otherworldly appearance. Then there were his muscles, chiseled and gleaming under the pool's lights. Every movement emphasized his physical power, his skin marked with faint golden scars that looked like glowing circuitry etched into his body. These marks were remnants of both his battles and his enhancements that added a strange but undeniable allure to his already commanding presence. As the last water dripped off him, Rex reached up with one hand and pushed his wet hair back, revealing his face at last. His golden eyes burned like embers, sharp and piercing as they scanned the group that had just arrived. The scene was something out of a storybook, a commanding figure emerging from the depths like a mythological sexy god. The effect on the room was immediate. The maids' faces flushed bright red, their nervous whispers dying in their throats. Even the Templars, disciplined as they were, couldn't help but glance at each other awkwardly, clearly affected by Rex's overwhelming presence. And then there was Lila. Despite all her training in composure and grace, she felt her breath hitch as Rex's piercing gaze locked onto her. Her gray eyes widened slightly, and she couldn't stop herself from gulping, the sound painfully loud in her ears. She quickly straightened her posture, trying to regain her usual calm demeanor, but the faint pink tint on her cheeks betrayed her. Rex raised an eyebrow slightly as he looked over the group while a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Welcome aboard the Cleopatra," he said, his deep voice resonating through the room. "I hope the trip wasn't too tiring." Lila opened her mouth to respond, but for once, the words didn't come immediately. It wasn't just his appearance or the sheer physicality of him, it was the way he carried himself and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him effortlessly. "No, it wasn't," she finally managed, her voice calm but slightly breathless. "Thank you for inviting us." Rex nodded, his golden eyes lingering on her for a moment longer before he turned and walked toward the edge of the pool. Good. I thought it was about time we met properly. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly as he picked up a towel, slinging it over his shoulder casually. For Lila and her entourage, this meeting was already shaping up to be far more overwhelming than they had expected. Rex placed the dumbbell back on the floor with a quiet thud, his golden eyes briefly glancing at Lila as she made her way to a nearby seat. The dim light of the gym reflected off the faint golden markings across his body, adding an almost ethereal glow to his muscular frame. He reached for a nearby towel, dabbing away the faint sheen of sweat on his brow before speaking again. "Do forgive me, little Lila," Rex said, his voice calm but carrying the undertone of strain from his workout. "Receiving you like this is far from ideal. But after waking up, there have been complications with my body. This is part of my rehabilitation. You'd be amazed at how much sleeping for months can wreck your muscles, even if it does wonders for fat loss." He chuckled softly, though his voice still sounded slightly fatigued. Lila tilted her head slightly, observing him in silence for a moment. Then, with a subtle wave of her hand, she signaled for her entourage to leave. The maids, always quick to obey, bowed deeply and exited the gym without hesitation. The guards, however, lingered for a moment, their eyes darting between Lila and Rex. Their instincts screamed against leaving the Saintess alone, even with a supposed ally, but after seeing Lila's unyielding expression, they reluctantly bowed and followed the maids out. Now alone with Rex, Lila walked forward, her graceful steps betraying a slight uncertainty, her gray eyes, though blind to the physical world, locked onto Rex's glowing figure. She could see him, but the rest of the room remained a hazy void to her unless Rex interacted with something directly. For example, the dumbbell he had just set down had briefly become visible to her, as had the machine he was using. Lila reached the seat and sat down slowly, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "There's nothing to forgive, Rex," she said with her voice being gentle but curious. "We were the ones who decided to come, after all. I'm more curious about why you wanted to speak with me like this." Rex let out a faint sigh as he adjusted himself on the machine, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "Well," he began, "truthfully, I didn't ask to speak with you. My wife did." Lila's eyebrows arched slightly. "Cleo?" she asked with her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Rex confirmed with a small nod. "But she's busy right now with the twins. They've caused quite the chaos on the ship today. So, it was left to me to deliver the message she wanted to share with you." Lila couldn't help but let out a soft chuckle, imagining the twins running circles around Cleo. "I see," she said, "and what message does Cleo have for me?" Rex leaned back slightly, his golden eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Well," he began, "she said this, you should take better care of the little mice inside your house." Lila tilted her head slightly with confusion flickering across her face. "Mice?" Rex continued with his tone, even and calm. "She said, there are some mice that are trying to get food from a neighbor in a different house. But this neighbor will only feed them if they bring valuable stuff with them." He stopped speaking and simply stared at her, letting the weight of Cleo's words settle. Lila's expression darkened slightly, her graceful composure shifting as her mind worked quickly to decipher the metaphor. "You're saying," she began, her voice calm but edged with steel, "that there's someone selling information about the human empire to a third party?" "Well," Rex replied while shrugging slightly, "that's what she said. Not that I know much about these sorts of things myself." He leaned forward, his golden eyes meeting hers. "But there's one more thing she told me to tell you." Lila's heart sank slightly, though her expression remained neutral. "What is it?" she asked after a few moments of silence. Rex paused as though choosing his words carefully before speaking in a soft, almost casual tone. "She said that there's an old human saying in ancient texts. A dog that bites the hand that feeds him is better off dead." Though Rex's voice carried no malice, the words hit Lila like hammers. She stiffened slightly, her serene mask cracking for a brief moment. To anyone else, it would have seemed like an insignificant metaphor, but to Lila, the meaning was painfully clear. Cleo was fully aware of humanity's true stance toward the Kael'zars and, worse, toward Rex himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Lila's mind raced her thoughts in a tangled web of concern and calculation. If Cleo truly knew the extent of the Human Council's distrust of the Kael'zars, then it meant they were being watched far more closely than they realized. Lila forced a smile onto her face, though it felt hollow. "I will keep that in mind," she said with her voice soft but slightly strained. Rex tilted his head slightly, his sharp golden eyes studying her for a moment before nodding. "Good," he said simply. He then stood, picking up the dumbbell again and resuming his workout without another word, as though the conversation hadn't shaken the very foundation of Lila's resolve. But for Lila, the words echoed in her mind like a storm. After sitting in silence for a few more minutes, Lila finally stood and excused herself, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing within her. As she exited the gym, her maids and guards fell into step behind her, but none of them dared to ask about what had transpired inside. Once alone in her quarters aboard the Cleopatra, Lila sat down heavily on a cushioned chair, her elegant hands trembling slightly as she replayed Rex's words in her mind. "A dog that bites the hand that feeds him is better off dead." As the doors to the gym slid open, a flock of small white robotic birds flew in, their mechanical wings fluttering with a faint hum as they circled the room. They darted gracefully through the air, their luminous eyes scanning the area as they filled the space with a serene, almost magical presence. Trailing behind them was Cleo, with her usual composed demeanor slightly frayed as she entered the gym. Her long black hair flowed like a dark river behind her, her golden eyes gleaming with faint irritation. Rex, still shirtless and doing push-ups with ease, didn't look up immediately. Instead, he chuckled lightly, his voice echoing in the quiet gym. "Welcome back," he said while finishing his final representative and standing up. "How did it go with the twins?" Cleo let out an exaggerated sigh, running her fingers through her hair as though trying to brush away her frustration. "I don't know where I went wrong," she began, her tone unusually emotional. "I was so sure I taught them everything they needed to know: strategy, logistics, supply operations. I even drilled them in thousands of ways to take down a target, and yet," she threw her hands up in the air, clearly exasperated. "They still made a mess. Do you know they almost lost a Mauler juggernaut? A Mauler, Rex? Those things are not cheap. The repairs alone will cost more credits than I want to think about." Rex laughed openly, his deep voice warm and playful. He walked toward Cleo, his broad frame towering over her as he reached out to gently ruffle her hair. "Ha ha ha, I told you before, keeping them jailed in a golden cage wouldn't do them any good. You've been spoiling them too much, Cleo." Cleo hit his hand, glaring up at him but failing to hide the faint pink blush creeping onto her cheeks. She grabbed Rex's massive hand and tried to wrestle it away from her head, but her efforts were futile against his sheer strength. "Spoiling them?" she retorted, her voice rising slightly in protest. "I raised them exactly the way the Kael'zars do. I followed all the protocols and archive guides for young Kael'zars, exactly." Rex grinned, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. "And that's your problem," he said while crossing his arms as he leaned closer to her. "Cleo, you've been raising them like pure-blooded Kael'zar kids. I don't know how absurdly overpowered Kael'zar children are, but the twins, they're more human than you think. You can throw all the theory and training at them you want, but if they've never actually applied it in real-world situations and then you toss them into the wild, they'll just end up running around like headless chickens." Cleo opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. For all her expertise in warfare and strategy, there was an uncomfortable truth to Rex's words, and it gnawed at her pride. Before she could respond, Rex stepped forward and, with zero warning, scooped her up into his arms, carrying her effortlessly like a princess. Wait, what are you doing?" Cleo shouted, her composure completely shattered as she squirmed in his grip. "Put me down, Rex, what's with all this touchy behavior today?" Rex grinned down at her, his sharp teeth flashing in a playful smirk. "Cleo, you need to relax," he said, his voice dripping with mischief. "You're way too emotional right now, and it's making you tense. I've got just the thing to cool you down." Cleo's golden eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What do you mean by that? Rex, what are you planning?" But before she could press him further, Rex turned toward the pool. "You know how to swim?" he asked casually. What? Why would you?" And then, without another word, Rex threw her into the pool. Cleo let out a startled yelp as she plunged into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. For a few seconds, the pool was still, save for the ripples caused by her entry. Then, with a faint hum of energy, Cleo floated back to the surface, a faint blue gravitational shield surrounding her and keeping the water from soaking her. She hovered above the pool like an indignant goddess, her piercing golden eyes glaring daggers at Rex. "Oh, hell nah!" Rex shouted with mock disbelief, his grin widening. Without hesitation, he jumped into the pool after her, his massive frame causing a loud splash that sent waves crashing across the surface. This time, the impact broke Cleo's shield, leaving her completely soaked. Her long black hair clung to her face and shoulders, and the look of pure outrage on her face was almost comical. "Rex!" she shouted, pushing her wet hair out of her face as she floated to the surface again. Her normally composed demeanor was nowhere to be seen. "Why did you do that?" Rex surfaced right in front of her, the water dripping down his muscular body as he grabbed her by the waist. His golden eyes twinkled with playful mischief as he pulled her closer. "Haha. Feeling better now?" he asked with his deep voice filled with laughter. "Was that enough to cool you down, Cleo?" Cleo glared at him, but the faint blush creeping onto her cheeks betrayed her. "You're impossible," she muttered, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Rex tilted his head, his grin never fading. "You might want to wrap your legs around me, by the way," he added casually. "Unless you want us to sink again." Cleo's golden eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she considered ignoring him out of sheer stubbornness. But as the two began to sink slightly, she let out a resigned sigh and looped her arms around his neck, her legs wrapping around his waist to stabilize herself. "There you go," Rex said with a satisfied nod, his tone smug. "See? Relaxation achieved." Cleo huffed softly, though she couldn't quite suppress the small smile tugging at her lips. For all his antics, Rex had succeeded in one thing. The tension and frustration she had been carrying just moments ago were now gone, replaced with a strange sense of calm. "Fine," she muttered while resting her forehead against his shoulder as she let herself relax in his arms. "You win. But next time, I'm throwing you into the pool." Rex laughed loudly, his voice echoing through the gym. "Deal," he said, holding her close as they floated in the water together. Rex swam toward one of the ropes dividing the lanes of the pool, gently placing Cleo so that she sat atop it. The rope dipped slightly under her weight, causing ripples to spread across the water. She looked at him with a raised eyebrow, her usual composed demeanor returning as she balanced herself gracefully on the rope. Rex reached out, gently lifting Cleo's chin with one hand, his thumb brushing against her lips with a deliberate slowness. His golden eyes locked onto hers, filled with that familiar mix of playfulness and intensity. Cleo didn't look away, her golden gaze meeting his with the cool, composed air of the Ice Queen she was often nicknamed for. "What are you trying to do now?" she asked with her voice as steady and sharp as ever, though there was a faint blush creeping onto her cheeks. "Well," Rex began, his lips quirking into a half-smile, "I threw you into the pool fully clothed, and since I like swimming in cold water, the pool's a bit chilly right now. I wouldn't want you catching a cold or anything, so." He paused, leaning closer, the mischievous glint in his eyes unmistakable. "I guess I'll have to warm you up somehow." Cleo raised an eyebrow, her composure intact despite his antics. "Oh," she said, tilting her head slightly. "But didn't you just say you wanted to cool me down? Now you're trying to warm me up? You're a walking contradiction, Rex." Rex chuckled while his hand trailed gently down from her chin to trace the line of her jaw. "You should know by now," he replied, his voice dropping to a softer, teasing tone, "that I'm a bit of a hypocrite." Cleo smirked faintly, her cool demeanor unshaken. She reached up, resting her hand gently over his, as though humoring his antics. She muttered, "HMPH," a tiny sound of amusement slipping past her lips. After all, that was the only response Cleo could muster at the moment, as she began to look Rex in the eyes and suck his thumb with her rosy, soft lips while he was also staring at her. As Rex let his thumb be sucked, he grinned. "It's always fascinating," he said, his voice thoughtful now, "how soft and warm you are. Even though your body is mostly nanomaterial." Cleo tilted her head slightly at the comment, always the perfectionist when it came to correcting misunderstandings, no matter the situation. The warmth, she said while stopping sucking Rex's thumb, and her voice carrying that familiar icy sharpness, comes from my energy core's heat dispersion system. It's efficient. Rex nodded, obviously less attentive to her explanation than she would have liked. Gently, he traced the curve of her neck with his hand, letting it fall downward. His golden eyes gleamed with curiosity as he put his hand on one of her soft breasts and asked, "And the softness?" Cleo was beginning to reply, using her natural instinct to explain what was driving her, but before she could say anything more, Rex leaned closer and held her cheek while he said softly, "You can answer later," as his lips drifted over hers in a long, warm kiss. "Wait a second," Cleo said firmly while gently pushing Rex back, or more accurately, Rex allowed himself to be pushed. "Is something wrong?" he asked, a teasing grin forming as his fingers lightly brushed hers, causing her breath to hitch. "We can't do this here," she said while her voice wavered as she tried to keep her composure. "What if someone sees us, or what if you lose your balance and sink?" Rex chuckled softly, his confidence unwavering. "That's your excuse? You underestimate me, Cleo. I picked up a little trick last time I fought that beast." As he spoke, he suddenly stopped floating, his body steady as though standing on solid ground beneath the water. "What? How are you?" Cleo's curiosity got the better of her. She squinted while peering into the water and realized Rex was standing on a glowing honeycomb-like shield beneath his feet. "See, no more excuses," he said playfully while stepping closer. He placed his hands lightly on her waist, pulling her toward him with a grin. "And as for someone seeing us, there's no one but the machines, and we can always erase their memories later. If the others show up, well, let them have something to talk about," he teased her while his voice dropped to a low murmur. Cleo's protests faltered as she felt the warmth of his touch and the intensity in his gaze. Her cheeks flushed while her resolve slipped as she let herself be drawn closer. Rex's touch was careful, yet there was an undeniable heat behind it, and Cleo found herself unable to look away from him. "Rex," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water lapping around them. Her fingers brushed over his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles almost instinctively. His steady breathing and the weight of his presence drew her in, her earlier hesitations fading into the background. At this point, Cleo has run out of excuses and has simply allowed herself to get stripped by Rex while glancing at him with a passive and horny face, which has only made him harder. When Cleo was entirely undressed, Rex took one of her wrists and drew it toward his rigid rod, moving his head close to her ear. "You know what to do now." When Cleo heard those words, she moved her hands slowly from Rex's neck to his lower body, delighting in the sensation of his abs muscles. Once her hands were on his firm rod, she carefully took it before thinking about something. "It looks bigger than I remember," she mumbled as she saw her small arm struggle to fully shut around it. It was thicker than her own arm and appeared to be about the same size. She then softly touched his balls with one hand while moving one of her fingers from the top of his rod to where his balls were, then moving it up and playing with the head of his rod while occasionally looking at Rex. "Do you like it?" she asked while playing with his rod head and making eye contact with him. Cleo's cute face with her tiny blush and the lust that was drawn on her face forced Rex's rod to twitch like crazy. "Enough with the teasing. Move your hands like I taught you before," Rex whispered while somewhat panting. After a few more seconds of staring at him, she gripped his thick rod in both hands and began slowly moving them up and down. Rex was quite excited by the sensation of her soft hands in the water because it was the first time he had done something like this. "That's enough teasing," Rex said, his voice low and commanding as he placed his hands on Cleo's butt and lifted her effortlessly. "Wait, don't lift me so suddenly, put me down," Cleo protested with a startled gasp, her voice rising as she squirmed slightly in his grip while her cheeks flushed since she was caught off guard by his boldness. Rex's lips curled into a mischievous smirk, his gaze locking onto hers with undeniable intent. "As the princess wishes," he murmured, his voice dripping with playful sarcasm. Instead of setting her down, he shifted her closer, and then he penetrated Cleo's tight hole with one powerful thrust. Cleo's eyes rolled back as Rex's thick rod filled her, causing a bulge on her stomach. "Phew. Why you? Khu. Damn savagee. Ah," she cried out, pain and pleasure warring for dominance. The combination of sensations overwhelmed her, rendering her speechless. As the pain became too much, a surge of pleasure replaced it, only to be followed by the return of the pain. Rex groaned while lifting her again and slowly pulling out his rod. Cleo bit his shoulder, releasing a loud moan as he withdrew. But when he penetrated her again, going balls deep, she bit him once more. "Fuck. Aghh. Ah," she exclaimed, digging her nails into his back as he increased his pace. Her protests faded, replaced by tension and anticipation. As the heat between them intensified, Cleo's voice softened to a breathy whisper. "Rex." She gripped his shoulders for balance, feeling every deliberate move. He leaned in close, his warm breath against her neck sending shivers down her spine. "You're incredible," he whispered, his tone heavy with admiration and desire. Cleo's mind spun as the line between hesitation and surrender blurred. Cleo's initial resistance and pain gave way to a mix of pleasure and passion as Rex continued to penetrate her. Despite the overwhelming sensations, she found herself drawn to him, her body responding to his touch and movements. The intensity of their encounter was palpable, with both of them lost in the heat of the moment. As Rex whispered words of admiration and desire in her ear, Cleo's hesitation began to fade, replaced by a sense of surrender. Her grip on his shoulders tightened, and her fingers pressed into his skin as she felt every deliberate move he made. The closeness between them grew, with Cleo's heart racing in anticipation of what was to come. The pain and pleasure that had initially torn her apart now seemed to blend together in a swirling mix of sensations, leaving her breathless and wanting more. Rex's warm breath against her neck sent shivers down her spine, and his lips brushing lightly against her ear only added to the intensity of the moment. In this state of heightened arousal, Cleo's mind was spinning, unsure of what she wanted or what would happen next. But one thing was certain. She was completely at Rex's mercy, unable to resist the passion and desire that had taken over her body. Her fingers trailed over his back, her touch unsure yet deliberate, as if testing the waters of their shared moment. Every sensation was heightened, from the warmth of his touch to the strength of his hold to the rhythm of their breathing. Everything was in perfect sync. "Rex," she murmured again, her voice barely audible as their gazes met. His expression was both tender and fierce, a balance of care and passion that left her completely disarmed. With a deep, unspoken agreement, their movements slowed, and the world around them faded into the distance. Only the two of them remained, immersed in the electrifying pull of their bond. "You made such a mess," Cleo said breathlessly while resting her head against Rex's chest, her arms wrapped around him. "The bot maids are going to have to clean this up later. You're such a brute." Rex chuckled, his voice deep and full of mischief. "I don't mind leaving it like this. Let's just say my legacy lives on," he teased her while planting a soft kiss on her forehead. Cleo groaned, rolling her eyes. "First of all, gross, and second, you do realize this pool has regenerative properties, right? Whatever you leave behind might stick around a lot longer than you think," she said, her tone half scolding but laced with affection. "Well then," Rex said with mock grandeur, dramatically raising his arms, "let them live free." Cleo snorted, smacking his arm lightly. "Rex, I'm serious. If the twins or one of the human envoys uses the pool, you could accidentally create a diplomatic incident," she said, trying to keep a straight face. The moment the word, pregnancy, left her lips, Cleo felt a subtle shift in Rex. She froze, glancing up at him, only to see his mischievous grin returning. His energy shifted, and she could feel the tension in his body building again. "Wait. No way," she stammered, her voice rising in alarm. "Don't even think about it, I'm still sore." Cleo's eyes widened, spinning with panic as Rex's grin grew wider. "You're too adorable when you panic," Rex said with a low chuckle while pulling her closer as she playfully tried to wriggle free. None of them realized that, at that very moment, Lila had returned to the gym. She'd been eager to speak with Rex about an urgent discovery she had made, something too important to wait. But when she arrived, what she stumbled upon left her completely stunned. From her hidden vantage point, she saw Rex and Cleo in the pool, locked in an incredibly massacre. Lila froze, her breath hitching as the scene played out before her eyes, leaving her unsure of what to do. She hadn't meant to stay, but her curiosity and something she couldn't quite place rooted her to the spot. Even when her heart pounded in her chest and her face grew impossibly warm, she couldn't tear herself away. Only when the two began to emerge from the pool for what appeared to be another round did Lila manage to slip away with her mind racing and her cheeks burning. Once she reached the safety of her assigned room aboard the ship, Lila shut the door behind her and leaned against it, her breathing uneven. "What did I just see?" she murmured with her voice barely audible while her hands flew to her flushed face, which was still hot to the touch. Her thoughts were in disarray, replaying the sight of Rex's powerful presence and the chemistry between him and Cleo. Lila's legs felt weak, and she found herself absent-mindedly pressing her thighs together, trying to calm the strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her. "No way. What was that?" she whispered to herself, pacing the small room in an effort to shake off the overwhelming feelings. But no matter how hard she tried, the memory lingered, leaving her both flustered and deeply conflicted. While Rex and Cleo enjoyed their brief moment of romance in the tranquil confines of the Cleopatra's pool, a completely different scenario was happening far across the galaxy, one rife with violence, destruction, and conquest of a pre-FTL world. The world below was a graveyard, littered with the bodies of its native inhabitants. The small gray-skinned aliens, who stood just 1.5 meters tall, had fought valiantly with their crude, gunpowder-based weapons, but their technology was fatally outmatched. They were a race stuck in the industrial period, with machinery that ran on fossil fuels and weaponry that was little more than toys against the monstrous invaders that had descended on them. A vast armada of alien ships hovered over the planet's atmosphere. These spacecraft were unlike anything else the galaxy's other civilizations had ever built. They were made from rock and crystal, with jagged, unnatural patterns that testified to their makers' savage efficiency. Corvettes and frigates showered down bombardments on the surface, their crystalline weapons reducing the final pockets of resistance to ash. Carriers, meanwhile, sent forth waves of smaller vessels that swarmed like angry hornets, scouting and transferring reinforcement in order to destroy any remaining defenders. It was no battle, it was a slaughter. Amidst the carnage stood a massive figure, 6 meters tall. He stood atop a mountain of corpses, his crystalline armor shining against the blood-red sky. The light bounced off the jagged edges of his huge form, giving him an almost ethereal look, as if he were more than just a conqueror, something beyond the mortal realm. This was the Revenant, a name spoken with fear throughout many imprisoned worlds. His body, made of living crystal and thick alloys, emitted a faint, strange glow. His hollow, blazing eyes examined the battlefield with disinterest, as if the thousands of souls lost before him were mere particles of dust. Another figure approached with heavy footsteps, breaking the Revenant's silence. A 4-meter-tall crystalline golem approached, its huge body blazing faintly and bearing 2 different crystals lodged in its shoulders. The golem kneeled before the Revenant, its massive bulk forcing the ground to shake. "Great Revenant," the golem said, its deep, gravelly voice echoing over the battlefield. "The world is ours. The rebel forces have nearly been decimated. The conquest has been a complete success." The Revenant tilted slightly and stepped down from the pile of bodies with slow, deliberate steps. Each step crushed the unfortunate victims beneath his feet, the sound of cracked bones and twisted flesh reverberating across the barren battlefield. "Good," the Revenant said with his voice sounding cold and mechanical, devoid of any emotion. "Take all of these carbon-based lifeforms. Enslave them. Once the slaves are secured, begin depleting the planet's resources. I want this planet to become dry, desolate, and lifeless. Its sole worth right now is to feed our forges and produce more fighters." The golem nodded. "It shall be done, Great Revenant." As the Revenant resumed his slow descent, his soulless eyes looked at the blazing wreckage of the alien capital. Fires blazed in the distance, sending plumes of smoke up to choke the scarlet sky. The air was thick with ash and the metallic tang of blood, but the Revenant paid no attention. This was a situation he'd conducted numerous times before. "Is there any news about the so-called Angel Conqueror?" the Revenant inquired abruptly, his tone calm but with an air of menace. The golem paused, its giant crystalline head lowered slightly. "There has been no news, Great Revenant," it announced. "He vanished after fighting one of our slave fleets. No sightings, no reports." The Revenant stopped, his flaming eyes narrowing slightly. "It is unwise," he replied slowly, his voice low and gloomy. to let a possible conqueror roam freely near our borders. Two conquerors cannot share the same space. Such competitiveness is unacceptable. The Revenant turned, his attention set on the horizon, as a gigantic transport ship fell from the skies. Its crystalline shell shimmered as it approached the planet's surface, and a subtle hum filled the air as the engines slowed. The vessel's sheer size overwhelmed even the Revenant, demonstrating the alien empire's immense power. "Send one of our regular fleets," the Revenant ordered, his voice breaking over the sounds of battle. "Hunt him down. Kill him. And ensure that no traces of his presence remain in the cosmos." "Yes, Great Revenant," the kneeling golem responded, lowering its head even farther. The Revenant climbed onto the cargo ship's waiting ramp, its luminous interior throwing an unsettling light on his towering figure. As the ship's engines roared to life, he took one last look at the devastated battlefield, where his golems were still rounding up the survivors like cattle. This was the fate of all who stood in his path, a fate he intended to ensure would reach the Angel Conqueror soon enough. The chamber was quiet, illuminated by the soft ambient glow of the holographic displays Cleo summoned to project fleet statistics. She rested comfortably on Rex's knee, her beautiful black hair falling down her back while he carefully dried it with a towel. Normally, the bot maids performed such jobs with precision drones, but this time, Rex insisted on doing it himself. It was a rare, private moment between the two, away from the chaos of war and politics. Cleo closed her golden eyes and enjoyed the sensation of Rex's powerful yet delicate hands stroking the towel over her hair. His warmth was comforting, in sharp contrast to his usual cool and crazy manner. "Cleo," Rex said, breaking the silence, "I've been wondering something for a while now." Her eyes flickered open slightly with her expression being curious. "What is it?" "How is it possible," Rex asked, his voice full of inquiry and nervousness, "that after all the times we've, after all that and, me releasing so much, how come you never got pregnant? Are you taking something, or is our union simply incompatible?" Cleo's eyes widened slightly before she gave out a quiet chuckle, her golden irises shining softly in the dim light. That's a reasonable question," she said, closing her eyes again as he continued to dry her hair. "As you well know, my race stopped reproducing naturally hundreds of years before our demise. By the time I was created, there was no information on natural reproduction available for me to learn from." She hesitated, her fingers twitching nervously as she played with a loose thread on her sleeve. "Also, Rex." She paused before continuing, her voice becoming softer. "I can't become pregnant. Even if I wanted to. My body is not suitable for reproduction. It was not built for that." Rex paused for a moment with his hands still in her hair. "You can't?" he asked gently. Cleo nodded, her face incomprehensible. "To have a child, I'd need to recreate my true body, the one I was destined to have before everything broke apart. However, I require living metal, which is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain. I've been looking for it non-stop, but..." Her words drifted off, filled with resentment and regret. Rex leaned forward, brushing her hair aside to kiss the nape of her neck. "It's all right, Cleo," he replied quietly, his deep voice comforting her. "I told you already, didn't I? I will help you look for it. We will find it together, regardless of how long it takes. We have all the time in the cosmos, after all." Cleo smiled faintly as he spoke, bending her head slightly so his lips might linger on her skin. "You are too patient with me," she muttered. Rex placed his arms around her waist, bringing her closer. "And you are worth it," he said without hesitation. Cleo shifted slightly in his lap and raised her head to gaze at him. "But if you really want a child, we could always use the artificial procreation chambers that my people used to produce more of us." Her tone seemed controlled, but Rex detected reluctance in her voice. She didn't want that. She preferred something genuine, natural. Rex rested his chin on top of her head, his arms still holding her securely. "That's not necessary," he said firmly. "I want this to be our journey. I can wait, Cleo. We're practically immortal, remember, there's no rush." Cleo closed her eyes again, a rare relief softening her features. As the quiet time stretched on, Rex changed the subject, his voice more casual now. "How is our fleet strength coming along? What is the status of our forces?" When he asked, Cleo produced multiple hollow screens with a flick of her fingers. The displays illuminated the area, displaying comprehensive schematics and statistics for their expanding fleet. She pointed to the first hologram, which displayed Cleopatra in all her magnificence. "We currently have the flagship Cleopatra," she explained, her voice taking on its typical critical tone. "We recently completed repairs on the Dreadnought-class warship Liberator. In addition, we've introduced 2 Leviathan-class carriers and various smaller ships, such as corvettes for anti-fighter operations and support frigates for supplies and maintenance." Rex leaned forward slightly, zooming in on the hologram of the Leviathan-class carriers. The ships were shaped like crescent moons, their sleek designs reminiscent of Cleo's people's advanced engineering. Impressive," Rex remarked. "And what can you tell me about these Leviathan carriers? What are their specs?" Cleo swiped at the holo screen, pulling up additional data. "The Leviathan-class carriers were one of the earlier cruiser designs my people used," she explained. "While they aren't as specialized as some of the more advanced models, they're highly cost-effective and versatile." She pointed to a diagram of the carriers inside. Each one has many floors dedicated to fighter bays, which can hold up to 500 fighters. The hull is coated in energy-absorbing material, making it difficult to detect, and it is outfitted with massive energy shields, graviton beam projectors for controlling opposing ships, and repair drones for in-combat maintenance. Rex nodded attentively. "Not bad," he said. "We're building a pretty solid navy under our command." Cleo crossed her arms, her voice becoming somewhat angry. "We could have had additional carriers, but someone insisted on building a prohibitively expensive dreadnought for Carlos." Rex couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, Cleo. Come on. It was your fault. You told me the dreadnought had the finest defensive capabilities, and Carlos is, well, frail in comparison to us, so I felt he needed it." Cleo pouted little as her golden eyes narrowed. "Fragile or not, that ship ate up a significant portion of our budget. We could have had at least 3 additional carriers by now." While still smiling, Rex leaned forward and poked her cheek. "You do realize you're adorable when you're mad?" Cleo pushed his hand away, but the tiny pink on her cheeks betrayed her. "HMPH. Don't think I'll let you off the hook so easily," she whispered, her tone softening. Rex leaned back with his arms still wrapped around her. All right. I'll take responsibility for the disaster. But admit it, it's a damn fine ship." Cleo rolled her eyes, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "Of course it's a fine ship. I made it after all," she shouted. The mood in the conference room was tense, with the weight of the meeting bearing down on everyone there. Sitting at the head of the table, Rex sat back in his chair, his golden eyes half-lidded with boredom. Cleo stood straight behind him, her typical cold demeanor giving her the air of an untouchable queen. To their left, Wise was casually lying in her chair, twirling one of her braids carelessly. Her cheeky grin contrasted sharply with the serious tone of the meeting. The twins sat close to Wise, fidgeting and whispering, seemingly uninterested in formal politics. On the other side of the table stood Lilla, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders as she wore her usual serene appearance. Behind her stood her personal guards, their white and crimson power armor shining in the lights, and her maids, who waited silently with their gazes lowered. Cleo's piercing voice cut through the silence like a razor. "Lilla, holy maiden of the human empire, you have requested a meeting with the actual ruler of the Kael'zars, and the request has been granted. So, I must question, why are you silent?" Her golden eyes stared at Lilla, unblinking and chilly. Lilla pondered for a little while, attempting to recall the sentences she had carefully practiced. But as she opened her mouth, her thoughts betrayed her, flashing back to the moment she accidentally stumbled upon Cleo and Rex in their private moment. Her demeanor wavered, her cheeks flushing slightly as she pushed the memories away and forced herself to concentrate. She took a long breath and steadied herself. "I am here," she started, her voice clear and decisive, "to represent the human empire and propose a change to the alliance pact we have with the Kael'zars." Rex's demeanor remained unchanged as he leaned forward slightly and rested his chin on his hand. He hummed, his tone neutral. "Do you want to stop being allies?" Lilla shook her head rapidly. "Oh no, nothing like that," she exclaimed, her tone sincere. "We want to renegotiate certain alliance arrangements. Specifically, we would like to make the following changes. Lila summoned a hollow screen with a flick of her palm, and it drifted across the table toward Rex. He caught it casually, his golden eyes studying the new contract. But the more he read, the deeper his frown got. His brow furrowed, his jaw tightened, and at the end, his fingers were firmly holding the hollow screen's edges. He handed it to Cleo without saying anything, his eyes narrowing in displeasure. Cleo took the holographic screen and read it quietly, her sharp golden eyes narrowing as she processed the text. When she was finished reading it, she did not speak right away. Instead, she clenched her fist, and the hollow screen shattered into 1,000 flickering shards of light before evaporating into nothing. When Cleo turned to face Lila, her face was colder than ice. Her voice was frosty, her remarks sharp and unforgiving. If I understand correctly, she started out, your human empire intends to continue its relationship with us while eliminating the 20% tax we levy on all of your businesses. You want to preserve our protection while providing yourselves with the moral right to reject any demands for military assistance. Cleo's golden eyes drilled into Lila, as if she were stripping her soul naked. Is that accurate? Lila, to her credit, did not flinch from Cleo's probing gaze. Her expression was calm as she nodded. It's as you stated. The room sank into an oppressive silence. The twins stopped fidgeting and focused their attention on Rex and Cleo. Even Wise, who normally saw such gatherings as little more than amusement, sat up in her chair, her grin dimming slightly. Rex let out a deep sigh, reclining back in his chair and rubbing his temple with one hand. And here I thought you were the smart one, Lila, he stated, his voice soft and exhausted. I told Cleo that you were smart. That you would be the only person who understood how this worked. But now, he sat forward abruptly, his golden eyes resting on Lila's with such ferocity that the air felt heavy. Now I realize I was wrong. Rex's voice began to rise, each phrase more powerful than the last. You want us to look after your empire, which we basically rebuilt from scratch, but you refuse to provide anything valuable in exchange? Lila opened her mouth to answer, but Rex's thunderous voice silenced her like a thunderclap. After all we have done for you? The force of his voice shook the room, causing even Lila's armored guards to take a step forward. Cleo maintained her composure, but her eyes showed her discontent. Rex got up, his huge form towering over the table, as he slammed his hand down on its surface. The impact caused the holographic screens around them to flicker briefly. Let me make one thing clear, Lila, he murmured, his voice dangerously calm. We aren't your mercenaries or servants. We are your allies, and alliances are formed out of respect or mutually beneficial advantages. What you've brought here today is more than just an insult. It's a claim that you believe we're fools. Lila's cool demeanor finally began to shatter. That was not my purpose, she clarified hastily, her voice becoming softer. Rex scoffed and leaned closer. Intentions do not matter. Actions matter. And your empire's actions, they reeks of disrespect. Cleo took a step forward, resting her hand on Rex's arm to calm him down slightly. Her voice was chilly, clear, and sharp. You may be the holy maiden of your people, Lila, she added, but you must understand that alliances are not one-sided. If you believe that we will sacrifice our resources, ships, and lives for your convenience, you are greatly mistaken. Rex stood up, his eyes still burning with rage, but his tone softened slightly as he spoke again. I'll explain what we're going to do, Lila, he continued. We're going to show your empire some respect, the kind of respect that only comes when you remember what it means to be weak and defenseless. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and the weight of his words sent a shiver through the room. Hold on a second, sir, I think your actions are going too far. Lila stood up and shouted, her voice trembling with defiance. I'm the one going too far? After you had the nerve to spit in my face? Rex shouted back, his voice shaking the room like a violent storm. Go run to your masters or whatever the hell they are and tell them we're going to war. His words echoed off the walls, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. Rex's glare burned into Lila as he jabbed a finger toward the door. I won't attack you right now, but you and your pack of ungrateful bastards better get off my ship. The air in the room was thick with tension. Lila's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Her hands curled into trembling fists, her frustration palpable. Everyone waited for her next move, But what happened instead caught them all by surprise. Someone else stood up. "Darling, it's not polite to speak to a young and beautiful girl like that," Wise said, her voice soft yet firm as she walked toward Lila. She wrapped her arms around her from behind, pulling her close in a comforting gesture. "Why don't we all take a moment to sit down and calm ourselves? Maybe then we can ask the right questions before we do something we'll regret," Wise continued, her tone soothing but carrying an undeniable authority. She guided Lila back to her chair, her hands firm but gentle as she urged her to sit. Rex's eyes followed Wise's every move, his expression dark and unreadable. His gaze shifted toward Cleo, who gave him a subtle nod of approval. With a heavy sigh, Rex returned to his seat, the tension in the room beginning to ease as he leaned back, though his eyes never left Lila. "Now then, little Lila," Wise said, her voice dipping into something almost playful as her hands rested lightly on the girl's shoulders. "Why don't you tell us what your true intentions are with all of this?" Her fingers traced calming circles on Lila's tense shoulders, her eyes narrowing as she waited for a response. Thanks to Wise, the suffocating tension in the meeting room had finally started to fade. Lila exhaled a heavy, defeated sigh before waving her hand toward her escorts. "Leave us. The rest of this conversation will be completely private." Her guards hesitated, their expressions filled with concern, but after several moments of convincing and a stern glare from Lila, they reluctantly obeyed and filed out of the room. The heavy door shut behind them with a dull thud, leaving only Lila, Rex, Wise, and Cleo at the table. Now alone, Lila turned her full attention to Rex. His golden eyes bore into her like burning embers, his anger was palpable, his jaw clenched tight. Her gray eyes met his at last, though it took all her courage to hold his fiery gaze. "First of all, I want to say this wasn't my idea. I'm not saying that to excuse myself from the responsibility of being here, but I need everyone in this room to understand my stance on this matter," Lila said with her voice steady, though her hands trembled faintly at her sides. There was a reason she rarely opened her eyes fully around Rex. She could sense his presence even with them closed, but the moment her gaze fell on him, the truth of his nature was laid bare before her, more vivid than she could bear. As her gray eyes widened, the image of the man in front of her shifted. The Rex she saw was no longer the fiery, wrathful figure of the moment. Instead, she saw a being of impossible beauty. His skin gleamed like porcelain, showered with a silvery light that seemed to emanate from within. His hair, usually a deep black, was now a radiant white, and his golden eyes had turned to shimmering silver, each holding the glimmer of stars within them. It was the same vision she had seen as a child, the same ethereal radiance she had once associated with the lady in white. Even as she tried to steady her breathing, Rex's voice thundered across the room, bringing her back into the harsh reality of the moment. "Even if you say that now, it doesn't change a damn thing. You're all stabbing us in the back. How do you expect any relationship between us to remain intact when you bring us this abomination of a contract?" His fist slammed against the table with a deafening crack, his anger spilling over like a tidal wave. Wise sighed and placed her hand lightly on Rex's, her touch a stark contrast to his violent outburst. "Darling, please stop interrupting her," she said with her voice calm and soothing but with an edge of firmness. "I know how unreasonable you can be when you're angry, just like that Kael'zar girl sitting beside you, but for my sake, let the little saintess finish what she has to say." Her words caught Rex off guard. He stared at Wise in disbelief, his fiery temper momentarily subdued. It wasn't just her unexpected defense of Lila that struck him, but also the way she carried herself now, graceful, mature, and composed, so unlike her usual playful and childlike demeanor. With a heavy sigh, Rex leaned back in his chair, his gaze cold and distant as he folded his arms across his chest. "Fine," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. "You can continue, saintess of the human race." The words cut through Lila like a knife, sharper than any of his previous outbursts. He had never called her by her title before, only by her name. The formality of it, the icy detachment in his voice, it was like a door slamming shut, a signal that whatever bond they had shared was now severed. Her heart clenched painfully in her chest, but she swallowed the hurt, determined to keep her composure. She took a deep breath and prepared to speak again, though the ache in her chest lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. While everything in that contract represents the stance of the Human Council, it is not my own, Lila said, her voice steady, though her gaze faltered under the dangerous aura of Rex's. The contract hasn't been made public to anyone outside the council, and they're still redacting it as we speak. I wanted to show it to you before it goes any further. Rex's eyes narrowed, the anger in his gaze still simmering, but he said nothing. It was Cleo who broke the silence, her expression sharp with understanding. Then this contract is nothing more than a prototype, isn't it? As the realization dawned, Cleo's expression shifted slightly. Without missing a beat, she reached for her connection with the Kael'Zar tech, issuing silent commands to halt the powering up of the Cleopatra's main cannons. She had been preparing to obliterate the humans' main carrier, but now her hands moved swiftly to reverse the preparations. Rex leaned forward, his piercing gaze still locked on Lila. Then tell me this. What do you want to achieve by showing me this now? His voice was calmer than before, but the fury lingering beneath it was unmistakable. What I want, Lila began, her voice loud and desperate at first, but it softened as her resolve wavered. By the end, it was barely above a whisper. What I want is for you to forgive the humans for what a few at the top are trying to do. Rex's expression darkened as he leaned back, his arms crossed, his voice laced with ice. And aren't you one of those few at the top, Saintess? Lila hesitated but quickly forced herself to respond. It's true, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, that I'm one of the higher-ups. But my influence isn't as great as you think it is. While I might be a symbol of hope for humanity, that's all I am. A symbol. Thanks to certain circumstances, I don't hold the kind of power you imagine. At best, I have 1 vote out of 10 in the council. Her honesty hung in the air like a fragile thread, her voice steady but burdened with the weight of her confession. The reason I came to show you this was to plead with you. I'm begging you, please forgive those who have no hand in this. Forgive those who know nothing of what's happening behind closed doors. The room fell silent for a moment. Rex didn't speak, but the tension in his expression was palpable. The heat in his gaze bore into her like a flame, threatening to consume her entirely. Lila tried to keep her composure, but the pressure of his presence was suffocating, making her voice shake as she spoke. It was Cleo who finally broke the silence once again. Her cold voice cut through the stillness like a blade. You can't claim the other humans are innocent, Saintess of the human race. If this contract were to go through, no matter what variables were in play, every single human would benefit from it. There are no innocents here, Saintess. Cleo's words struck like hammers, each one deliberate, each one sharp. Lila flinched slightly but didn't look away. Even as Cleo's cold tone sent shivers down her spine, Lila stood her ground, knowing that she could not afford to falter now. Lila couldn't find any words to refute what Cleo had said. As much as she wanted to, the truth of her statement was undeniable. This so-called human empire hasn't even lasted 10 years, and it's already showing signs of internal infighting, Cleo said coldly, her expression as unyielding as steel. With a wave of her hand, she summoned several hollow screens, each displaying damning evidence gathered by her spies embedded within the human ranks. The screens floated around the room, each one illuminating the dark truth. They showed rampant corruption among human officers and high-ranking officials, their greed and betrayal laid bare. There were records of secret deals made with alien races, pacts to sell military-grade weapons and restricted technology, and equipment meant solely for human defense. The humans had bartered away their future for personal gain, undermining their fragile empire piece by piece. As you can see, this has been going on for months, Cleo continued, her voice cutting through the air like ice. The ambition of your race is astonishing, even to me. So tell me, Saintess, do you have an excuse for this as well? Lila stood frozen as more hollow screens appeared, circling her like specters of guilt. Each one displayed a new layer of treachery, a new betrayal, a new failure of the system she had once believed in. Her gray eyes scanned the damning evidence, her heart sinking deeper with every passing moment. She had believed, truly believed, that she was leading humanity down a righteous path. But what Cleo was showing her shattered that illusion. It was as if the very foundation of her faith had been ripped out from under her, leaving her stranded and hollow. The overwhelming weight of the truth bore down on her shoulders, making it harder to breathe. Cleo's words, sharp and relentless, reverberated in her mind. Do you have an excuse? Lila's lips trembled as she searched for something to say, anything that could lessen the impact of what she was seeing. But no words came. How could there be? Everything she was seeing was real. And the worst part? She hadn't known. She had been blind to it all. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the hollow screens. Lila's chest tightened as the proof of humanity's sins surrounded her, their greed and corruption pressing in from all sides. Her gray eyes began to water, her vision blurring as the truth became unbearable. Her knees wavered, and her head lowered as a single tear escaped and slid down her cheek, then another, and another. Tears fell freely from her beautiful eyes as the weight of everything consumed her. The righteous road she thought she had walked had been a lie, a facade built on the shadows of betrayal. The humans she had vowed to lead were far from innocent, and the realization broke something deep inside her. For several moments, Lila stood there in silence, her head bowed, her tears pooling at her feet. It wasn't anger or defiance that filled the room now. It was sorrow, raw and unrelenting, a pain that Cleo could see clearly. But Cleo didn't stop. She crossed her arms, her voice cold and unyielding. This is the empire you're trying to defend, Saintess. A crumbling system that would betray even its allies for profit. So tell me, is this the righteousness you spoke of? Lila didn't answer. She couldn't. The weight of it all crushed her voice into silence, and all she could do was cry. Okay, everyone, let's stop here. There's no need to keep pushing this now that it's come to this. How about we take a breather and continue later? Wise said while rising gracefully from her seat and walking toward Lila. Her voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced the room for a moment. This isn't over yet, Wise. Not just because Cleo said, her cold tone unwavering, but Wise cut her off before she could finish. I said we will take a break, Wise shouted, her usual gentle demeanor cracking. Her sharp eyes narrowed, and in an instant, they shifted, becoming slit-like, like those of a snake. The intensity of her stare locked Cleo in place, filling the room with an undeniable tension. Cleo raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the display, but before she could retaliate, Rex placed a hand firmly on her shoulder. Okay, let's go with what Wise suggested. We do need a breather, he said calmly, his tone more of an order than a suggestion. Though Cleo wasn't afraid of Wise, Rex's intervention was enough to cool her temper. The last thing he wanted was a clash between the two of them, especially now, with relations with the humans already strained to the breaking point. A confrontation here could tip the scales into a three-sided war, something he couldn't allow. Wise gave Rex a warm smile, her mood instantly shifting. I knew you were on my side, darling, she said with a playful lilt, wrapping an arm around Lila and gently helping her to her feet. Lila's legs felt weak beneath her, but she didn't resist as Wise guided her toward a hidden exit at the back of the room. Wise spoke softly to Lila as they walked. Come on, let's get you out of here. No one needs to see you like this, not even your escorts. The hidden door closed behind them with a quiet hiss, leaving the room in a heavy silence. Only Rex and Cleo remained now, the air still thick with unspoken tension since the twins had left at the same time as Lila's escorts, leaving Rex and Cleo to face the aftermath of the meeting alone. Rex leaned back in his chair, resting his head against its back as he closed his eyes. So, Cleo, he began, his voice quieter now, what are your thoughts on all of this? About the humans, from your race's point of view? Cleo crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as ever. If it were up to my people, an alliance like this would never have happened, she said bluntly, her icy tone cutting through the quiet room. They are weak. Compared to us, they'd never be considered equals. My people would have made them subordinates, not allies, and if they dared to pull something like this. She gestured vaguely toward the remnants of the conversation, her expression cold, they would be exterminated, their natal world destroyed from orbit. Simple as that. Rex opened one eye and glanced at her, his lips curling slightly at her response. Well, I'd prefer it if you didn't destroy their natal world, he said, his tone half joking, half serious. Even if I don't look at it now, I was human once, too. So, technically, their natal world is my natal world as well. Kind of a sentimental thing, you know? He paused for a moment, a distant expression crossing his face. Though, now that I think about it, I don't even know where humanity's natal planet is. Lost to time, I suppose. Cleo tilted her head slightly, watching him with curiosity as his expression shifted. But, Rex said after a beat, his interest rekindled, I have to admit, making them our subordinates doesn't sound like a bad idea. So, how do we go about that? His golden eyes gleamed with intrigue as he waited for her answer, his voice carrying a strange mix of humor and genuine curiosity. Meanwhile, Wise had taken Lila to the greenhouse Cleo had built, a sanctuary on the Cleopatra meant for the exotic birds Cleo had acquired from the black market. The space was massive, absurdly so, and likely consumed at least 20% of the ship's monthly water supply. The air inside was humid and filled with the soft chirping of vibrant, alien birds, their songs echoing among the lush greenery. Lila sat beside Wise on a curved bench near a small artificial waterfall, quietly wiping her tear-streaked face. Shame tore at her, knowing she had broken down in front of the others like a child. She hated that she'd let herself appear so weak. Wise, however, watched her with a calm, protective gaze. There was a reason she had been shielding Lila all this time, even when others might have found it foolish. From the moment Wise first met Lila as a child, something in her had stirred, a deep maternal instinct she didn't entirely understand. It was a phenomenon common to Ys's race, whose queens would instinctively adopt the children of fallen princesses as their own. Perhaps that was why she couldn't help but see Lila as someone worth protecting. Stop crying, Lila, Wise said gently as she touched Lila's face, her long, slender fingers brushing away the lingering tears. I know things aren't looking good for you right now, but you have to be strong, especially when dealing with people like Cleo. She's nasty and loves to strike where it hurts the most. But everything she said was true, Wise, Lila whispered, her voice breaking as fresh tears welled up in her gray eyes. Tell me, Wise. Everything I've done. Was it all wrong? Her trembling gaze locked onto Ys's green eyes, searching desperately for reassurance. Wise tilted her head slightly, her emerald gaze warm and steady. Instead of answering, she reached for Lila's hands and gave them a gentle squeeze. First, tell me what it is that you wanted to do, she asked with her voice soft and full of maternal care. Lila hesitated, her tears falling freely now, each word a struggle to say. I wanted my people, the human race, to rise again, she began, her voice quivering. I wanted us to stop being slaves, to regain our pride and dignity, and I thought we could repay Rex and Cleo for helping us reach that goal by showing them the same light I saw when I was a child. Her voice cracked, and her breathing hitched as she spoke, but it's like everyone's forgotten what we're supposed to be fighting for. They've taken their own path, driven by greed and ambition, and they've abandoned the purpose of our rise. I don't know what else to do, Wise. I'm so tired, she broke down completely, burying her face in her hands as her sobs grew louder. I'm not as strong or collected as they think I am, I'm not a leader, I'm just a crybaby. The confession spilled out of her like a torrent, raw and unfiltered. It was the truth she had hidden from everyone, the truth she had been too afraid to admit, even to herself. But in Ys's presence, it felt natural to let it all out, as though she had returned to being the little girl who had once clung to Wise for comfort. Wise watched her cry, her expression softening as a sense of understanding washed over her. Memories of Lila as a child flashed through her mind, and as those emotions swelled, something within her began to shift. Her body started to change, almost imperceptibly at first. Her childlike features faded away, replaced by those of a mature, charming woman. Her delicate frame grew taller, her presence more commanding, but her movements remained gentle and soothing. She wrapped her arms around Lila, pulling her into a warm embrace. You're not a crybaby, Wise whispered as she stroked Lila's hair, letting the girl bury her face in her chest. You're just carrying too much on your shoulders. Let it out, Lila. Let it all out. The greenhouse fell quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Lila clung to Wise, her sobs gradually subsiding as she felt Wise warmth envelop her. In that moment, it didn't matter that she was a leader or a symbol for her people. She was just Lila, a girl who needed someone to tell her it was okay to feel weak. While Wise held Lila tightly in her arms, offering comfort through her warmth and steady presence, the door to the greenhouse hissed open. The faint hum of its mechanism cut through the soft chirping of the exotic birds, and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed across the lush space. Someone had entered and was walking directly toward them. Wai's sharp senses were the first to pick up on the intruder. She turned her head slightly, her vibrant green eyes narrowing as she focused on the figure approaching through the dense greenery. For a moment, her body tensed, ready to shield Lila if necessary, but as the figure stepped into view, a glimmer of relief flickered across her face. She exhaled softly and loosened her hold on Lila, though she did not entirely let go. Instead, she chose to remain still, her gaze fixed on the new arrival as they drew closer. Wise had already decided to let them approach without interference. Whoever this was, she had deemed their presence neither hostile nor unwelcome, at least for now. Lila, still nestled against Ys's chest, had yet to notice the intruder. Her shoulders quivered slightly as she tried to control her uneven breathing, her tear-streaked face hidden from view. The footsteps grew louder, each one echoing faintly in the vast space. The atmosphere of the greenhouse shifted slightly, the stillness giving way to a faint tension as the figure moved closer to the two women. Ys's expression remained neutral, but her piercing gaze tracked every step. She waited, silently curious as to what the newcomer intended. "Who?" Lila finally whispered, her voice hoarse and weak, as she sensed Ys's attention shift away from her. Slowly, she lifted her head, her swollen, tear-streaked eyes blinking as she turned to see who had entered. "It's just me. No need to be scared," Rex said as he stepped into view, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the greenhouse. He stopped a few feet from the girls, his broad back turned to them as he looked toward the artificial waterfall cascading gently into the lake. His tone was calm, though it carried a weight that was hard to ignore. "I didn't come here to continue the argument from earlier, and I won't pretend to be sorry for the actions I was ready to take against those who dare betray us, but..." He paused for a moment, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I do want to say I'm sorry to you." Wise tilted her head, her sharp green eyes watching Rex closely, but she remained silent. Lila stirred slightly, wiping at her swollen eyes, her face still buried in the comfort of Ys's embrace as she processed his words. "I should have listened to what you had to say until the end," Rex continued, his voice softer now, "but I let my rage get the better of me. I failed you in that moment, and for that, I apologize." He reached down and picked up a handful of small crystals from the neatly manicured ground, tossing one absently into the artificial lake. The splash was faint, barely audible above the sounds of the birds and the waterfall. His golden eyes flickered with something uncharacteristically vulnerable as he gazed at the rippling water. "While we're here, in this calm and quiet place, I don't want to talk to the holy maiden of the human race. I want to talk to Lila, the little girl I saved all those years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Rex tossed another crystal into the water, watching as it skipped twice before sinking to the bottom. Several moments passed in silence, broken only by the sound of the waterfall and the faint chirping of the exotic birds. Finally, Lila began to calm herself, her shaky breaths becoming steadier. Though her voice was still strained and hoarse, she managed to speak. I never wanted things to turn out this way," she said softly, her hands clenching the fabric of her dress as she spoke. "But as Cleo showed earlier, I didn't know. I didn't know how rotten humanity had become or how far they've strayed from what we were supposed to be." Her voice wavered, and she bit her lip, struggling to keep her composure. "Tell me, Rex, was I wrong all this time?" Rex tossed another crystal into the lake, watching the ripples spread outward before turning back to face her. His golden eyes met her swollen, tear-filled ones, and for a moment, his expression softened into something almost human. Then, in typical Rex fashion, he grinned. "Like hell, I'd know," he said with a laugh, his voice echoing through the greenhouse. "I know nothing about leading an empire. Hell, the only reason things work under me is because the people around me are too damn good at what they do, and, well..." He gestured toward a few Aegis sentinels standing guard by the lake, their metallic forms gleaming in the artificial sunlight. "Most of them aren't even people, they're machines." Lila blinked, caught off guard by his casual, almost playful response. Rex's grin widened as he stretched his arms above his head, then let himself fall backward onto the soft, trimmed grass. He lay there with his arms behind his head, staring up at the glass ceiling of the greenhouse, where faint stars from the ship's projection system twinkled overhead. But I do know one thing, he continued, his tone softer now, though his smile remained. None of this, none of what I've achieved would have been possible if I tried to do it all on my own. I always had people around me who believed in me and who helped me every step of the way. And you know what, Lila? I'm actually impressed. Lila tilted her head slightly, her gray eyes wide and questioning. I'm impressed that the little girl I pulled out of the gutter all those years ago managed to build what she has now, Rex said with his voice filled with genuine admiration. In this kind of galaxy, that's no small feat. You've come a long way, Lila, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. His words, so unexpectedly heartfelt, struck a chord in Lila. She bit her lip again, this time to stop herself from tearing up once more. Wise, still seated beside her, watched the exchange silently, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. Rex closed his eyes, letting out a deep sigh as he relaxed into the grass. The artificial sunlight bathed him in a soft glow, and for a moment, the tension in the air seemed to lift. You just need to remember, kid, he added, his voice almost a whisper now. You don't have to carry it all on your own. So, after saying all of that, Rex spoke once again, but this time his voice was calm and steady. I really hope you understand that I'm offering my help with whatever it is you want to do now, so tell me. He shifted slightly, still lying on the grass, his golden eyes glancing at Lila. What is it you want to do? Lila hesitated for a moment, staring down at the trembling hands resting in her lap. But then she clenched her fists, her resolve hardening as she looked up at Rex, her gray eyes blazing with renewed determination. I want to fix the human empire, she shouted, her voice ringing out through the greenhouse. I want to make things right, how they should have been from the very start. For a brief moment, Rex blinked at her in silence before letting out an awkward, almost exasperated laugh. Well, that's impossible, you know, he said while scratching the back of his head and grinning at her like she'd just declared she wanted to move a mountain with her bare hands. I know it'll be hard, Lila shot back, raising her voice even more, but I don't think it's impossible. Her words carried a fiery defiance, and her determination filled the space around her like a tangible force. Rex's grin faded slightly as he sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. His expression grew more serious, though his tone remained light. The thing is, Cleo already predicted you'd say something like that, he said bluntly, his gaze meeting hers. She said the organization you've built is already doomed to fail, but that you can at least save some of it. Lila froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her dress tightly as she swallowed the lump in her throat. What did Cleo say? She asked hesitantly, her voice trembling. How can I save some of them? Rex leaned back slightly, his golden eyes glinting with an odd mixture of sympathy and honesty. He had no intention of softening the truth for her. Well, he said, his voice casual but carrying a weight of finality. She said you should use the popularity you've got as the holy maiden of the human race. Use it to rise above the others and create a faction of your own. Start a new organization, one where you hold all the authority. Lila stared at him, her gray eyes wide with surprise. She had expected a harsher answer, something cruel or cutting. Instead, what he had said made a strange kind of sense. It was terrifying, yes, but logical. You need to cut out the rot before it spreads, Rex continued, watching her reaction closely. You won't be able to save everyone, and you sure as hell won't be able to fix the mess the human empire's already become. But if you can take the right people with you and build something stronger, you'll have a chance to start fresh. Lila remained quiet, her hands still clutching her dress as her thoughts swirled. The idea of abandoning the very empire she had dedicated herself to building felt like betrayal. But at the same time, if she stayed, if she kept trying to fix what was already falling apart, would it truly make any difference? You don't have to decide right now, Rex said while lying back down on the grass and folding his hands behind his head. His tone was lighter now, almost teasing. Take a minute. Think it through. It's not every day someone tells you to overthrow your own empire and start from scratch, after all. Despite herself, Lila let out a faint, shaky laugh at his words. Her chest still felt heavy with doubt, but a tiny spark of hope had ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, one she hadn't seen before. Wise, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, gently rested a hand on Lila's shoulder, her emerald eyes warm and understanding. "Whatever path you choose, Lila," she said softly, "you can count on me." The reassurance made Lila's lips tremble, and she blinked back fresh tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel entirely lost. Lila stood up from the beach chair, where she'd been resting with Wise, and asked, "So, what do you think I should do from now on to achieve that?" Rex, with a smirk on his face, closed his eyes and said, "Like hell, I know. I'm just the messenger. You should only kiss the messenger, not ask him hard questions." Lila's response left her momentarily dumbfounded, but then she kneeled beside Rex and gently kissed his forehead. The kiss startled him, and he lifted his torso off the ground, staring at Lila as she walked away. What? Rex touched his forehead, now humid from the kiss. He turned to Wise and asked, "What the hell just happened?" Wise saw Lila's face had been bright red after kissing Rex's forehead. With a dangerous smile, Wise said, "I saw how you were cheating on me and making a move on a little girl. That's what happened." Rex stood up, defensive. "I'm the victim here. I was just lying there doing nothing. How could I flirt with her?" Wise appeared behind him in an instant and whispered, "You're being too defensive, darling. Could it be you really liked that kiss, and now your mind is full of younger girls?" Rex turned around and grabbed Wise by her arms. "I'm telling you it's not like that." Wise licked her lips and said, "Prove it then." Rex kissed her fiercely, without romance. Surprisingly, that was how Wise liked it. After a few minutes of intense kissing, Rex stopped. "Is that enough proof?" Wise smiled barely noticeably and said, "Barely, but I'll let it pass this time." While Rex and Wise were caught up in their heated exchange, Lila had already made her way back to the meeting room through the secret passage Wise had used earlier to smuggle her out. The passage was dimly lit and silent, her footsteps echoing faintly as she hurried forward. Her heart raced, not from fear this time but from the weight of the decision she had made. Once she reached the end of the passage, she took a deep breath, steadying herself before stepping out into the meeting room. Inside, the atmosphere was vastly different from before. Cleo stood in the center, surrounded by hundreds of hollow screens floating in a perfect arc around her. The glow from the screens illuminated her icy expression as her eyes darted across streams of data and footage. She didn't turn to look at Lila as she entered but still addressed her as if she had known all along that Lila was coming. "Welcome back," Cleo said, her tone calm but sharp. "By the look on your face, I can determine that you've come to a decision about the situation, am I correct?" Lila hesitated for only a moment before nodding firmly. "Good," Cleo said while waving her hand. The hundreds of hollow screens around her vanished in an instant, leaving only the two of them in the room. Her piercing golden eyes locked onto Lila's. "Well then, let me hear your answer." Lila swallowed hard, but when she spoke, her voice was steady and resolute. I plan to use my title as a saintess in the human empire to create a zealot force. A faction of humans who are loyal only to me. With their help, I'll take control of what's left of the empire and rebuild it from the ground up." Cleo's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, though it was impossible to tell whether it was approval or amusement. I see. It's a bold plan, but one with a glaring weakness," she said, her tone clinical as ever. "Before you can take such a step, there's something far more critical that you must decide." Lila furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean?" Cleo leaned back slightly, raising her hand as a series of hollow screens flickered back into existence, displaying various chaotic scenes. Entire civilizations being consumed, religious zealots driven mad, and entities of unfathomable darkness wreaking havoc on fragile worlds. "What kind of deity are you going to serve?" Cleo asked, her tone cold and logical. "Surely you're aware that humans, despite their stubborn pride, are mentally fragile. If you begin preaching faith, people will listen. But faith has its price. Out there, in the void, there are creatures that are powerful, ancient things that can and will answer those who call out to them. And sometimes, those creatures aren't kind. They consume, corrupt, and destroy entire civilizations, as you can see here." Lila's stomach churned as she stared at the images on the holoscreens, each more horrifying than the last. Entire planets reduced to nothingness. People who had placed their trust in false gods, only to be devoured from the inside out. Cleo continued, her voice unwavering. For the limited access I have to the Kael'zar's collective knowledge, I doubt that the gods many races serve are truly divine. But there are entities out there powerful enough to earn such a title. The late Emperor of the Kael'zars was one of them, since he was on the brink of reaching Tier 9, a level of power that defies comprehension. Her hollow screens disappeared again as she folded her arms and sat down, gesturing for Lila to take the seat beside her. Her piercing gaze remained fixed on the young saintess. So, unless you already have someone in mind to serve as the deity for your zealot force, I'd suggest you reconsider your plan. Without a god, your movement will crumble. And if you choose poorly, you might doom your people before you've even begun. Lila hesitated, her mind racing as she considered Cleo's words. Slowly, she made her way to the chair next to Cleo and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the armrests. Her voice was soft and hesitant, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. Well, I don't know if this counts, but… Lila hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts before launching into an explanation. She began recounting what she knew about the Lady in White, the mysterious, otherworldly figure who had visited her when she was a child. She spoke of the gift the lady had bestowed upon her in exchange for her eyes and the price she had paid to receive it. The details were sparse, but she also mentioned the son the Lady in White had spoken of. Cleo listened intently, her expression calm but her mind clearly working to process the information. When Lila finished, the room was silent for a moment, the weight of her story hanging in the air. Interesting, Cleo finally said while leaning back slightly as she tapped her chin in thought. If what you're saying is true, this entity could be one of the superior ancient races, beings that only emerge when a new galaxy is formed. There's not much reliable information about them in the records we have, but… Cleo trailed off as her tone grew more serious. Lucky for you. My race has fought against one of these entities before. With that, Cleo raised her hand, summoning a single hollow screen. This one was unlike any Lila had seen before. Its surface was marked with glaring red warnings, flashing symbols, and countless layers of encryption. Thousands of locks began to unlock in rapid succession as Cleo worked with frightening efficiency, her fingers moving faster than the eye could follow. What I'm about to show you, Cleo said, her tone dropping to something almost ominous, is classified information. No one outside of the Kael'zar royal family and a few select individuals has ever seen this. You are to take this knowledge to your grave. Do you understand me? Lila swallowed hard but nodded, her gray eyes unwavering as she met Cleo's icy gaze. Yes, I understand. I won't speak of this to anyone. Cleo studied her for a moment, her piercing gaze searching for any trace of doubt or deception in Lila's face. When she was satisfied that the saintess was speaking the truth, she nodded and continued working. The final locks on the hollow screen clicked open, and Cleo gestured for Lila to watch closely. This is one of the most forbidden recordings in our archives. Pay attention. It will give you an idea of what you may be dealing with. The hollow screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing. The recording showed a scene that could only be described as breathtaking and terrifying. Emperor Zynathar, a deep, resonant voice said as the camera panned across a fleet of Kael'zar ships, each one massive and bristling with weapons. The one that spoke was a Kael'zar clad in exquisite white power armor with glowing azure lights. He stood tall at over 5 meters, his imposing form dwarfing those around him. His voice carried a sense of urgency as he spoke to the golden figure standing at the forefront. The royal fleet and all the princesses with their forces are in position. The planet destroyer weapons are fully charged and awaiting your command. The camera shifted to focus on the Emperor, mentioned by the armored figure. Emperor Zynathar was a being unlike anything Lila had ever seen. His body gleamed like molten gold, his enormous form towering over even the Kael'zar in white armor. Every movement he made radiated power, and his glowing eyes burned with an intensity that felt almost alive. Understood, Zynathar said, his voice calm and deep with a tone of absolute authority. His gaze was fixed on a red dwarf planet in the distance, its surface cracked and unstable, glowing faintly with an ominous light. The planet looked as though it were barely holding itself together, its fractures pulsing like veins beneath its crust. Zynathar's gaze didn't waver as he gave his next order. Archive all footage of this battle. Restrict access to the royal family's archives only. You are responsible for this, Memory Keeper. As you command, my emperor, the white-armored Kael'zar replied, bowing his head in deference. The footage continued, shifting to display the fleet's formation. Thousands of ships hovered in perfect synchronicity, their massive weapons aimed at the dwarf planet. The planet destroyer weapons hummed with energy, their glow intensifying as they prepared to fire. Lila couldn't tear her eyes away. The power and coordination displayed in the recording were staggering, but it was the planet itself that sent a chill down her spine. Something about it felt alive. Before she could voice her thoughts, Cleo paused the recording. The image froze on the fleet moments before the planet destroyer weapons were unleashed. Cleo turned to Lila, her expression grim. The entity you spoke of, the lady in white, may be something similar to what was encountered here, Cleo explained, gesturing to the frozen image of the cracked planet. This was no ordinary celestial body. It was inhabited. Or perhaps it was the entity itself, its body so vast that it took the form of a planet. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the image. If you plan to use this lady in white as the figurehead or deity of your movement, Cleo continued, you need to understand what you're dealing with. These beings don't follow mortal logic. They have their own agendas, their own unfathomable goals. Even if they grant you power, the price they demand may be more than you're prepared to pay. Cleo leaned back in her chair, folding her arms as she regarded Lila seriously. So, I ask you again, Saintess. Do you still plan to invoke this entity for your cause, or will you reconsider? Lila clenched her hands together, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just seen. But despite her fear, there was also a spark of determination in her eyes. She had come this far, so turning back now wasn't an option. I want to see the video first and decide later on, Lila said firmly with her gray eyes locked onto the recording, refusing to waver. Very well, Cleo replied, her tone as neutral as ever. With a flick of her hand, she resumed the recording. The footage continued, the Kael'zar fleet still in perfect formation. Emperor Zynathar remained a towering figure of calm authority, his glowing golden body a stark contrast to the dark, fractured red dwarf planet before him. The silence in the room was almost deafening as Lila watched, anticipation clawing at her chest. From the center of the dying planet, something began to stir. Two massive, crimson hands emerged from the planet's crust, their grotesque form dripping with black slime that hissed and steamed in the void of space. The sight alone was enough to make Lila shiver. The hands clawed their way outward, tearing through the already unstable planet. As they did, the surface of the red dwarf world began to crack further, glowing with an ominous light. And then it happened. The world released an unfathomable amount of energy, the sheer force of it sending devastating shockwaves across the sector. The screen trembled violently, even as the recording equipment struggled to contain the sheer magnitude of what was happening. Attention to all ships, Zynathar's calm, commanding voice cut through the chaos. Deploy shields to maximum capacity and focus them forward. Overheat the engines and prepare for impact. The orders were relayed instantly, his daughters and their forces responding in less than a microsecond. The Kael'zar fleet moved with mechanical precision, every ship positioning itself and bracing for the incoming energy. When the shockwave reached the fleet, it was a cataclysmic force that could have obliterated lesser ships. But the Kael'zar defenses held strong, their shields absorbing the impact as if it were nothing more than a passing breeze. Lila watched in awe at the sheer technological superiority on display. But the reprieve was short-lived. Moments later, the red dwarf world exploded with a deafening roar that echoed even through the recording. The detonation sent thousands of massive debris chunks flying in all directions. Some of these fragments hurtled toward the Kael'zar fleet, crashing into ships with devastating results. Entire vessels were vaporized in an instant, their destruction captured in grim detail on the recording. And then, the true horror revealed itself. From the center of the explosion, a figure emerged. It was a humanoid shape, but its size was beyond comprehension, dwarfing even the largest Kael'zar ships. Its skin was a deep, blood-red hue, and from its back, several black, writhing tentacles extended, pulsating with a sinister energy. The creature's body was coated in the same black slime as the hands that had torn through the planet. The entity let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to distort the recording itself, causing the footage to glitch and flicker for a moment. "Attention to the fleet," Xynathar's voice rang out once more, his tone still calm but now carrying a sense of urgency. "Fire the main cannons at the creature. Pin it down. Once immobilized, deploy the world-class destroyer cannons." The Kael'Zar fleet obeyed without hesitation. Thousands of weapons lit up the void, their blasts converging on the massive creature. The display was blinding, with energy beams of every color streaking through space. Yet, to Lila's horror, the attacks seemed to have no effect. The creature's crimson skin absorbed the firepower like stone in a stream, completely unscathed. The creature retaliated. Black tentacles snapped forward, unleashing devastating laser beams that tore through the Kael'Zar fleet with terrifying precision. Smaller ships were obliterated in seconds, their remains scattering into the void like ashes in the wind. But the time bought by their sacrifice was enough. "World destroyer cannons locked on target," an artificial voice announced. The camera focused on the creature one last time as the massive weapons prepared to fire. Its roar shook the screen again, the tentacles thrashing in an attempt to retaliate, but the energy signatures of the world-class destroyers were too overwhelming. "Fire," Xynathar commanded, his tone devoid of hesitation. The next moment, the recording went white. For several minutes, there was nothing on the screen but an unbroken expanse of bright, blinding light. Lila stared, waiting, her hands clutching the edges of her chair. "What happened? Is the video over?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "Negative," Cleo replied, her tone steady. "What you're seeing is the after-effect of the world-class destroyer weapons. Each one is powerful enough to obliterate a planet. When you fire hundreds of them simultaneously at a single point, the result is a collapse in localized reality. The sheer amount of energy released creates nothingness. Reality itself fractures for several minutes, unable to sustain the level of force exerted." Lila's eyes widened. "I've never read about anything like this before. Was your race really that powerful? When did you find out about this effect?" Cleo's lips twitched into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "The same moment this recording was made," she said simply. "This battle taught us many things, and among them was the cost of facing a creature of this magnitude. The fact that we had to rely on that level of weaponry just to hold it back should tell you how dangerous it truly was." The white screen began to fade, the recording speeding up until the after-effects dissipated. Lila leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding as she waited to see what came next. Once the video finally came back, the blinding white faded to reveal a battlefield unlike anything Lila had ever seen. The other worlds in the sector were completely obliterated by the devastating power of the world-class destroyer cannons. But in its place, the monstrous entity still stood, its massive, crimson form looming over the wreckage of the Kael'Zar fleet. The golden figure of Emperor Xynathar was locked in combat with the creature. His colossal form moved with a precision and fluidity that defied his enormous size. Energy radiated from him with every strike, each blow powerful enough to split mountains, and yet, even after taking the brunt of the devastating attack from the fleet's cannons, the creature endured. Its right arm had been obliterated, reduced to nothingness by the overwhelming force of the attack, but to Lila's horror, the severed limb was slowly regenerating. Black slime oozed from the wound, reshaping itself into muscles, bones, and flesh. It was as if the very laws of nature bent to its will, refusing to let it die. Lila could hardly breathe as the battle raged on. The creature let out another deafening roar, its black tentacles thrashing wildly as they lashed out at everything in their path. Each tentacle moved with horrifying speed and precision, slicing through Kael'Zar ships and weapon platforms as though they were made of paper. Entire sections of the fleet were obliterated in seconds, and even the smaller Kael'Zar war machines were struggling to keep their distance. "Look closely," Cleo said, breaking the silence. Her voice was cold and steady as her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. "This creature took a direct hit from hundreds of world-class destroyer cannons and survived. That arm is regenerating right now, right? It'll be fully restored in less than a few minutes. This is the kind of entity you might be invoking if you rely on the Lady in White. Are you starting to understand the scale of what you could be dealing with?" Lila didn't respond, her wide eyes fixed on the screen as the Kael'zars rallied to fight. Massive Kael'zar warships hovered into view, deploying an array of heavy weapons that unleashed a storm of firepower against the creature. At the same time, towering warfare mega-constructions descended from above, their impossibly large frames dwarfing even the creature itself. These behemoths bristled with weaponry and shields, designed solely for battles of this magnitude. But even these titanic reinforcements weren't enough to turn the tide. The creature's attacks were relentless, its black tentacles swiping through the Kael'zar's forces with horrifying efficiency. More powerhouses from the Kael'zar royal forces began to join the battle. Tier 7 warriors, clad in gleaming armor and wielding weapons that crackled with terrifying energy, surged forward like a tide of light. Each of these warriors was a powerhouse in their own right, capable of leveling cities with ease. They attacked the creature in coordinated waves, using formations and tactics honed over centuries of battle. Yet, even with their combined strength, it wasn't enough. Every time the creature struck, its blows carried an unimaginable force, sending the Tier 7 warriors flying like scattered leaves. Many of them perished instantly, their bodies obliterated in an instant by the sheer power of the attacks. Others were sent back to their respawn spots, where they would regenerate a new body and return to the battlefield moments later. Lilla's mouth went dry as she watched. The Kael'zars were throwing everything they had at the creature, and still, they struggled to contain it. "Respawn spots?" Lilla asked, breaking her silence. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. "What are those?" Cleo glanced at her briefly before returning her gaze to the recording. "Advanced Kael'zar technology," she explained. "For those above Tier 5, their consciousness and memories are stored in a data bank. When their bodies are destroyed, they can regenerate a new one at a designated location. It's one of the reasons our empire was able to maintain dominance for so long, but even with that advantage..." Cleo trailed off, letting the footage speak for itself. The screen flickered as the battle continued to unfold. Despite their near-infinite reinforcements, the Kael'zars were being pushed back. Entire legions of Tier 7 warriors fell, their weapons barely leaving a scratch on the creature. The mega-constructions fired their planet-shattering weapons in an attempt to pin it down, but the entity's regenerative abilities and raw power made it seem unstoppable. Emperor Zynothar continued to fight at the forefront, his golden form a beacon of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. His attacks struck true, each blow landing with enough force to create massive shockwaves that rippled through space, and yet, the creature refused to fall. "Do you see now?" Cleo said, her tone heavy. "Even with the might of the Kael'zar Empire, even with the Emperor himself leading the charge, this battle pushed us to the brink, and this was just one entity, one." Lilla's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile what she was seeing. The sheer scale of the battle was incomprehensible. The Kael'zars were supposed to be one of the strongest races in the galaxy, yet here they were, struggling to contain a single opponent. The recording continued, showing the creature letting out another guttural roar as it unleashed another wave of destructive energy. Ships were obliterated. Warriors were thrown into respawn once more. And yet, the Kael'zars fought on, their forces rallying around their emperor. "Why are you showing me this?" Lilla finally asked, her voice shaking. Cleo didn't answer immediately. Instead, she paused the video again, freezing the image on the moment the creature regenerated its arm fully, its massive form standing tall and defiant against the Kael'zar fleet. "I'm showing you this," Cleo said, her voice cold and deliberate, "because if you invoke the Lady in White, or any entity like her, you might unleash something like this. Something that even an empire like mine struggled to contain. If you're not prepared to face the consequences, then abandon your plan now." Lilla stared at the frozen image on the holoscreen, the terrifying creature towering above the wreckage of the Kael'zar fleet. Her chest felt tight with fear, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, a spark of determination flickered within her. "I still want to choose her as the symbol of our faith," Lilla said finally, her voice steady despite the tension in her body. "After all, as I told you before, I already have a clue about who the son of the Lady in White might be. If we make both of them the symbols of the new religion, it would be safer, don't you think?" Cleo's golden eyes narrowed slightly, a glimmer of curiosity lighting up her expression. "Oh, tell me more about this idea of yours," she said while leaning forward slightly. "And also, who exactly do you think the son of a Tier 9 entity could be?" Lila hesitated, her hands fidgeting as she thought about how to respond. For a moment, she questioned whether revealing her full thoughts to Cleo was the right choice. But after everything Cleo had done to help her so far, she decided to trust her. Taking a deep breath, she looked Cleo directly in the eyes and spoke with total determination. "I plan to make the Lady in White the goddess of our religion, and her son would serve as her envoy. The prayers and calls would be directed toward her son instead of her." Cleo raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued even further. "Why to her son?" she asked, resting her hands on the table as she leaned closer. "From what I understand of most religions, they pray directly to a powerful deity, not to a creation or subordinate of it." Lila clasped her hands together tightly, her nervous fingers still fidgeting. "Well, remember how I mentioned that I have an idea about who her son might be?" "I remember," Cleo replied, her voice calm but firm. "But you haven't provided any actual information about this mysterious son yet." She folded her hands and waited patiently, her piercing gaze locked on Lila. Lila took another deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "The thing is," she began, her voice quieter now, "I think Rex is the son of that entity. The son of the Lady in White." Cleo's expression didn't change, but the silence that followed was deafening. Her golden eyes bore into Lila's, clearly processing the statement, waiting for her to continue. "As I've already told you, my eyes are different," Lila said while trying to gather her thoughts. "You already know about the gift she gave me and how I can see things as they truly are. And that's why I think Rex is her son." Cleo tilted her head slightly, a spark of intrigue flickering across her usually stoic face. "And how do your eyes confirm that?" Lila hesitated again, playing with her fingers as she tried to find the right words. Finally, she just blurted it out. "The Rex I see with my eyes. He doesn't look like the Rex you all see. He looks completely different. He looks like the Lady in White, but in a male form, his skin, his hair, even his eyes. He's her reflection, but as a man." Cleo's expression remained neutral, though her fingers tapped the surface of the table thoughtfully. "If what I'm saying is true," Lila continued, her voice growing more confident, "then directing the calls and prayers toward Rex would be much safer. We wouldn't be invoking the void or any unknown entities. We'd be calling on him specifically. That way, we'd be controlling the focus of the religion, and the risk of summoning something else, something dangerous, would drastically decrease." When she finished speaking, Lila looked at Cleo nervously, waiting for her reaction. Cleo finally leaned back in her chair, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She nodded slowly, her mind clearly processing the implications of Lila's plan. "I see," she said after a long pause. "If what you say is true, then your approach does make sense. By focusing the prayers and worship on Rex, you're effectively minimizing the danger of calling on the void. If he truly is connected to the Lady in White, then he could act as a stabilizing intermediary." Cleo tapped her chin thoughtfully before continuing. "And since you see Rex differently with your eyes, you could use that to your advantage. The statues and symbols for your new religion could be modeled after the Rex you see and not the one everyone else does. That way, the humans wouldn't suspect that you're aligning yourself with us or selling out to the Kael'zars. It's a smart move, Lila." Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her as she saw Cleo nodding in approval, but she also noticed a faint glimmer of amusement in Cleo's eyes, as though she was finding this entire situation deeply entertaining in her own way. A few days later, following the tense discussions in the meeting room, Cleo and Lila had reached a mutual understanding. With negotiations finalized, the human envoy departed the Cleopatra, marking the beginning of a new chapter, one that would inevitably lead to massive conflict within the human empire. The seeds for an internal war were sown, and Lila knew she'd have to prepare for the storm ahead. Meanwhile, once all the diplomatic obligations were finally out of the way, Rex wasted no time. He took his small fleet and left the sector, setting a course to the trading station located within a sprawling asteroid belt. The station, with its massive construction bays and bustling shipyards, became the perfect place for the next phase of their preparations. For the next 2 months, the Cleopatra underwent significant upgrades to its weaponry and shielding systems. Alongside this, Cleo spearheaded the production of advanced fighter and bomber units. Among the new designs was the Wraith-class fighter. However, the star of the new fighter fleet was the Venom-class bomber, a cutting-edge bomber unit designed specifically for high-impact strikes. The Venom-class bomber was a sight to behold. Its wide-bodied frame was reinforced with heavy hull plating and glowing energy vents running along its sleek sides. Its wingtips flared outward, and bomb bay doors lined its underside, capable of deploying devastating payloads. Equipped with plasma bomb bays, heavy torpedo launchers, magnetic shielding, and anti-fighter laser turrets, it was built to deliver overwhelming firepower. But as formidable as it was, the bomber came with one glaring flaw. It was slow, painfully slow. With practically no energy shield capability and limited maneuverability, the Venom-class bomber was the definition of a glass cannon. Its survivability relied entirely on tactical precision and heavy fighter escort. This drawback became a point of contention during training, leading Rex to commission a new addition to the Cleopatra, the Game Room. The Game Room was a high-tech simulation chamber, featuring spherical pods that allowed users to practice simulated battles. The pods could replicate scenarios spanning ground, air, water, and space warfare using both existing and experimental units designed by Cleo. It was an efficient way to train without wasting valuable resources or risking lives. "Damn it, Cleo!" Rex shouted as he emerged from one of the simulation pods, his hair disheveled and his face flushed with frustration. "Can't you do something about these damn turtle slow bombers? I can't even get them to the objective without enemy fighters tearing them apart." Cleo, standing nearby with her ever-composed demeanor, handed him a cold bottle of water. "Negative," she replied calmly. "Increasing their speed without adding an energy shield would be far too dangerous for the pilots. They'd be sitting ducks the moment they were detected." Rex groaned, uncapping the water bottle and taking a long drink before retorting. "Then at least give them an energy shield. Anything to stop them from getting shredded out there." Cleo shook her head, her golden eyes glinting with amusement as she summoned a holoscreen in midair. "Also impossible. Adding an energy shield would increase their energy output significantly, making them detectable from far greater distances. Worse, if a bomb were to detonate inside the shield due to malfunction, it could cause a chain reaction, annihilating the entire bomber. Look," she said, gesturing to the screen, which displayed footage of one of her test runs. Rex watched as the footage showed a Venom-class bomber activating an energy shield. Within seconds of releasing its payload, the plasma bombs detonated inside the shield's radius, causing a catastrophic chain reaction that destroyed not only the bomber but also its nearby escorts. "See," Cleo said, folding her arms. "We've run these simulations hundreds of times. A shield on this design is more of a liability than an asset." Rex let out a long sigh, his frustration clearly mounting. "Fine. Guess I'll just have to figure out a way to use them more effectively so they can actually reach their targets." He pinched the bridge of his nose before glancing toward the two pods in the corner of the room. "How are the twins doing with the simulation, anyway?" Cleo turned her head toward the pods, where the twins had been inside for over 4 hours. She began reviewing the data scrolling on another holoscreen. "They're struggling. While their combat strategies have changed and improved over the past few months, they're still too reckless. They haven't even passed the first mission yet." Rex chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Figures. They're still treating everything like a game of smash and burn." Cleo gave him a rare smile and nodded. "Indeed, but despite their failures, their determination is admirable. This simulation system was a smart idea, Rex," she added, giving him a thumbs up. "It's an efficient way to train our forces without wasting resources or risking lives. I'm impressed." Rex shrugged, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. Still, we need those bombers ready for the next operation. Keep working on ways to improve their survivability." "Understood," Cleo replied, her expression returning to its usual calm professionalism. "I'll see what adjustments can be made, though I suggest you also keep practicing. Those bombers will need a commander who can make the most of their design limitations." Rex groaned, already dreading another round in the simulation pod. Yeah, back to the grind." "Oh yeah, now that I remember, how's the movement of our enemy?" Rex asked as he climbed back into the spherical simulation pod, preparing for another round of grueling practice. They're still on track toward us, Cleo replied, her golden eyes narrowing as she summoned several holoscreens in midair. I haven't figured out how they know our location, but one thing is clear. They have no idea I've deployed stealth surveillance drones to monitor their every move. The holoscreens displayed footage of the enemy fleet, an intimidating collection of ships crafted from rocks and glowing crystals. The vessels floated ominously in formation, their designs looking more like massive chunks of a planet's mantle than conventional spacecraft. I see, Rex muttered while leaning forward to study the footage. His eyes settled on a distinctive symbol etched into the side of one of the rock ships, a jagged, angular emblem glowing faintly with an ominous red hue. He immediately recognized it. Did they really think they're going to catch us by surprise a second time? The Revenant Ascendancy. They must, Cleo replied, her voice as calm and cold as ever. It seems they're underestimating us. But until we gather more intelligence about their vessels, we can't accurately gauge their full capabilities. We're walking into this partially blind. And what about our defenses? Rex asked, tearing his eyes away from the holoscreens to glance at Cleo. How are they coming along? Are we ready for them? Negative, Cleo responded bluntly. She flicked her wrist, and a new series of holoscreens appeared, displaying real-time progress reports on the station's upgrades. While the anti-fighter and bomber defensive towers on the station are operational, we're still waiting for completion of the new energy core reactor and the military-grade dual energy shield. Without those, our defenses are still incomplete. Rex clicked his tongue in frustration but nodded. I'll leave that to you, then, he said while leaning back into the POD's cockpit. Keep me updated on their movements. I'll handle this simulation for now. Understood, Cleo replied with a short nod. As Rex settled into the simulation, she turned on her heel and left the game room, her mind already shifting to the many tasks ahead of her. As Cleo walked through the sleek corridors of the Cleopatra, her focus was interrupted by a familiar and unwelcome voice. Hello there, cold beauty. Cleo's eyes narrowed slightly as Wise appeared beside her, waving playfully and tilting her head to catch Cleo's face. Ys's movements were carefree and unbothered, the polar opposite of Cleo's rigid and disciplined demeanor. What do you want, Izera? Cleo asked, her voice laced with its usual chill. It was a tone she reserved exclusively for Wise, a voice that always carried an undercurrent of tension and something darker. Despite the years they had spent together, Cleo could never bring herself to truly accept Wise. After all, Wise was a Chrysari, a species responsible for exterminating much of Cleo's own race. Even now, the sight of Ys's playful grin was enough to stir old, bitter memories. Wise, undeterred by Cleo's cold tone, placed a finger on her cheek and made an exaggeratedly cute face. Oh, come on, don't be so bitter with me, she said while pouting slightly. How can you be so cold to someone as cute as me? Cleo sighed audibly, her patience wearing thin. Every time you come to me, it's because you want something, she said, her voice flat. So, what is it this time, Izera? Hee, Wise giggled, twirling a lock of her hair as she walked alongside Cleo. You know me so well, Ehem. She paused dramatically, her playful tone dropping into something far more serious. I came with a message from my mother, and it's for you. Cleo froze mid-step. Her golden eyes narrowed as she turned to face Wise fully. Your mother? She repeated, her tone sharp. The mention of one of the hive minds, the supreme leaders of the Chrysari, was enough to immediately command Cleo's attention. Even with all her power, the hive minds were beings she had to approach with caution. Seeing Cleo stop, Wise gave her a wide grin, clearly relishing the reaction. That's right, Wise said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. She asked me to deliver this to you personally. So, cold beauty, are you going to listen, or do I have to make you? Cleo's hands clenched into fists at her sides for a brief moment before relaxing. Her expression remained icy, though there was now a faint edge of wariness in her eyes. I'm listening, she said. Good, Wise said with a teasing sing-song lilt. She leaned in closer, her grin widening. It's about the Revenant Ascendancy. What do the hive minds want with the Revenant Ascendancy? Cleo asked sharply, her piercing golden eyes locking onto Ys's playful emerald ones. Her patience was already running thin, and she wasn't in the mood for YS's games. Well, Wise began, tilting her head with an innocent smile that only made Cleo's irritation increase further. As I'm sure you already know, their ships are made of minerals. My mom wants to see if they're, how'd I put it, good nutrients for our troops. She said this with the same carefree tone one might use to comment on the weather, her voice light and whimsical. Cleo's gaze hardened. So, what you're saying is the hive minds want to devour the remains of the Revenant fleet, is that it? Not exactly, Wise replied, her smile widening ever so slightly. What she wants are the remains of the battle. It doesn't matter whose remains they are. Yours, the Revenants, anyone's really, she doesn't care. Cleo's expression darkened further, her displeasure etched clearly across her face. As usual, Wise seemed entirely unbothered, as if she hadn't just dropped a deeply unsettling revelation. Ah, but don't misunderstand, Wise added, clasping her hands behind her back and leaning forward slightly with an air of mock innocence. I'll still fight alongside you guys. After all, it's my duty to fight with my darling husband. Her voice was as sweet as honey, but her teasing tone cut through Cleo's growing frustration like a knife. Cleo's fists clenched at her sides, her patience reaching its limit. So what is the point of telling me this? She asked coldly. If your mother isn't sending reinforcements, why are you wasting my time with this useless information? YS's grin didn't falter. Instead, her eyes glimmered with mischief as she tilted her head the other way. Well, it's because she wants to talk with my darling Rex first. Then, maybe she'll decide what to do, whether to send reinforcements or not. Cleo's composure finally broke. Her fury erupted as she slammed Wise against the cold metallic wall of the corridor, her hands gripping YS's arms with crushing force. Do you think I'm an imbecile? She shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. Wise blinked, clearly unfazed by Cleo's sudden outburst. If anything, her grin grew wider. Hey, I don't mind being pushed to the wall, she teased with her voice as infuriatingly carefree as ever, but I'd definitely prefer if Rex was the one doing it instead of you. Don't joke with me, Izera, Cleo shouted, her grip tightening as her golden eyes burned with rage. Do you think I'm a toy for your miserable race? Do you think the hive minds are untouchable? Do you think there's no one in this galaxy capable of defeating them? YS's playful demeanor didn't falter. If anything, she seemed to enjoy Cleo's fury, as if it were a game to her. I don't know why you're yelling at me, Wise said with a sly smile. I'm not the one who told you those things, you know, I'm just the messenger. The carefree tone in YS's voice only served to infuriate Cleo further, but after a few seconds of silence, she let out a heavy sigh. Her grip on YS's arms loosened, and she stepped back, regaining her composure. Izera, Cleo said coldly, her voice now steadier but still laced with venom. Are you sure you want Rex to go to the hive mind? She tilted her head again, her grin softening just a little as she raised an eyebrow. Why not? It's not like anything bad will happen to him while he's visiting my mom, you know. Her tone was almost dismissive, as if Cleo's concern was entirely unfounded. Cleo stared at her, unblinking. Are you certain? Should I remind you what the queens of the hive minds are infamous for doing? Her words were sharp, cutting through YS's nonchalance like a blade. For the first time, Wise didn't respond immediately. The playful spark in her eyes dimmed slightly as her expression grew uncharacteristically quiet. She didn't look angry or surprised, just thoughtful. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but significant. Cleo studied her for a moment longer before letting out another sigh. Without another word, she turned and resumed walking down the corridor, leaving Wise alone with her thoughts. Wise remained by the wall for a moment, her emerald eyes staring off into the distance. For once, her carefree expression had been replaced with something far more subdued. That same night, Rex was already lying comfortably in bed, his arms behind his head as he stared at the ceiling. Cleo sat nearby in front of a mirror, brushing her long, black hair with slow, deliberate strokes. The soft glow of the room's lights reflected off her smooth skin, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Rex, I received a message from the hive minds, she said suddenly, her voice calm but carrying a subtle tension. Do you want to hear it? Sure, why not? Rex replied, his tone light and teasing as his gaze shifted to her reflection in the mirror. It's not like I have anything else to do while lying here on this ridiculously comfy bed, recharging myself, with a beautiful girl making herself even more beautiful before coming to lay next to me. He grinned, his golden eyes sparkling with playful mischief. Cleo paused her brushing and let out a small sigh, the corner of her mouth twitching at his antics. She turned slightly in her chair, meeting his gaze through the mirror. Wise told me her mother wants to meet you in person, she said bluntly. Her voice was composed, but the subtle edge in her tone betrayed her displeasure. But I hate it. Rex raised an eyebrow, propping himself up on one elbow as he studied her expression. Why are you against it? He asked. It's not like I'm going to stay with her forever or anything. Cleo stood, setting the brush down on the table as she turned to face him fully. Her golden eyes were serious now, her usual cool demeanor cracking just enough to let him see her concern. It's not that, you idiot, she said with a hint of exasperation. It's just, from the little information we have about the hive minds, there's one thing we know for sure. The queen is extremely picky when it comes to her daughter's partners. She won't accept what she considers inferior genes to be introduced into their ranks. Rex's playful smirk returned as he raised both eyebrows. Hold on a second, what's wrong with my genes? I'm pretty sure Wise said mine were of legendary quality, you know, he said while grinning as he opened the blanket to invite her to join him in bed. Cleo let out a small huff, walking toward the bed and slipping under the blanket next to him. She rested her head on his chest, her silver hair spilling over his shoulder like liquid moonlight. It's not that simple, she said, her voice softer now as her fingers idly traced patterns on his chest. Usually, when the queen of a swarm selects potential partners, it's because she's looking for something specific. Maybe genes from a species with incredible defense or a race that possesses a unique supernatural ability that she wants to introduce into her ranks. In your case, Cleo hesitated, her golden eyes flickering with uncertainty. You're originally human, and humans aren't exactly well-studied species. At least, not in the same way as some of the other advanced races. So what you're saying is that there's a high chance she'll decide I'm not worth keeping around? Rex asked, his tone casual as he began gently patting Cleo's head. Affirmative, Cleo replied, her voice laced with reluctance. And if she does come to that conclusion, there's a chance she'll try to kill you. Worse, I don't know if I'd be able to stop her. We don't know how strong this queen is, and Wise, she might not be able to help you either. She's still under the control of the queen, no matter how free she appears to be. Rex fell silent for a moment, his hand continuing its soothing motion through Cleo's hair as he processed her words. Despite the heavy implications of what she was saying, his expression remained calm, even thoughtful. You're really worried about me, huh? Rex finally said while a faint smile tugged at his lips. Cleo didn't answer immediately. Instead, she buried her face slightly into his chest, her voice muffled but tinged with frustration. Of course I am, you idiot, she said quietly. You're reckless and arrogant, and you never take things seriously until it's too late. How could I not worry? Rex chuckled softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. Well, I don't plan on dying anytime soon, he said confidently. And besides, if she's as picky as you say, then I just have to make myself irresistible, right? Maybe show off these legendary genes Wise was bragging about. Cleo groaned, lifting her head just enough to glare at him. This isn't a joke, Rex. I know, he said, his grin softening into something more genuine. I'll be careful, Cleo. I promise. Cleo studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes searching his for any trace of doubt or insincerity. Finally, she let out a sigh and rested her head back on his chest. You'd better, she muttered. For a while, the two of them lay there in comfortable silence, the tension in the room gradually fading. Cleo's breathing grew softer, her body relaxing against his as her eyelids began to droop. After several more days of preparation, the long-anticipated meeting with the Queen of the Chrysari was finally here. Despite Cleo's warnings and his own doubts, Rex had decided to go through with it. Part of him was genuinely curious to meet someone from one of the strongest factions in the galaxy, a faction that could rival even the megacorps in power. But circumstances were far from ideal. The Revenant Ascendancy fleet was closing in and could arrive at any moment. Because of this, Cleo, the twins, and the majority of Cleopatra's forces had to remain behind to prepare for the potential battle. Cleo had argued, in no uncertain terms, that taking anyone else along would only increase the danger to both Rex and themselves. Rex, as usual, brushed off her concern with his usual confidence, but now, standing at the edge of YS's organic battleship, he couldn't help but feel a small knot of unease forming in his gut. Darling, are you ready to go and meet Mother? Wise asked sweetly, wrapping her arms around him from behind, her voice brimming with excitement. Rex chuckled softly, adjusting the seals on his full-power armor. Well, I'm as ready as I'll ever be. His armor gleamed under the dim lighting of the docking bay, its advanced plating and systems fully functional, including his helmet, which he would need to wear at all times once inside YS's ship. The Chrysari vessel, as he'd learned, wasn't exactly a traditional starship. It was a living, breathing beast, a massive bio-organic battleship with no oxygen supply or artificial gravity. For all intents and purposes, stepping inside without life support was a death sentence. The moment they boarded, Rex could already feel the unsettling squish beneath his boots. The floor was some kind of pulsating organic material, warm and slightly damp. Around them, in the dim bioluminescent glow, the massive shapes of Chrysari warriors loomed in every corner, most of them appearing to be asleep, or, at least, dormant. The warriors were massive, towering over Rex even in his armor. Their exoskeletons were heavy and segmented, and their grotesque mandibles looked more than capable of snapping a tank in two. Mounted on their backs were strange, organic energy cannons that looked both alien and terrifyingly powerful. Rex froze for a moment, glancing around nervously before leaning back slightly to whisper to Wise, who had somehow climbed onto his back like a humanoid backpack. Are you sure these dudes aren't going to wake up looking for a midnight snack and decide I'm a tasty chicken leg? Wise giggled while resting her chin on his shoulder as she hugged him from behind. Nope. Don't worry, darling. You've got my mark on you. These guys are totally loyal to me, they'd never hurt you. In fact, they'll treat you almost the same as they treat me. Rex raised an eyebrow under his helmet, still glancing warily at the massive warriors. I feel like, almost, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Wise giggled again, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Oh, come on, don't be such a worrywart, she said, playfully poking the side of his helmet. Well then, Rex sighed, deciding to move on. Anything I should know about your mother? Like, I don't know, things I definitely shouldn't say in front of her. Wise tilted her head, her expression turning thoughtful for a brief moment. Not really, she said finally while shrugging. You just have to answer whatever she asks. But if you don't feel like answering, just ignore her. That's what I always do. Rex muttered, his voice deadpan. I don't think that would work for me, Wise. You're her daughter. I'm just some random guy. If I ignore her, I'll probably end up as soup. He paused for a second, then added dramatically, and if I do end up in a soup, please tell her to make it something normal, like beef stew or something. Just don't make it chicken soup. I hate chicken. If I'm going to be eaten, at least let me die with dignity. He gasped, pretending to be shocked. Oh, okay. I'll be sure to tell her no chicken soup. See, I knew it. There really is a possibility I'll end up as soup. Rex shouted, and the two of them devolved into playful bickering that echoed through the dim corridors of the living ship. Eventually, they arrived at what Wise called the bridge of the battleship. But when Rex stepped inside, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in disbelief beneath his helmet. Wise? He asked cautiously, his voice trailing off. Yes, darling, Wise responded cheerfully as she climbed off his back and stretched. Are you sure this is the bridge? Rex asked, his voice filled with doubt. Of course it is, Wise replied confidently, walking further into the room. Why do you ask? Rex gestured vaguely at their surroundings, his tone growing more incredulous. Where do I even start? Like, for example, why is there a bed? Indeed, in the center of what was supposed to be the bridge was a massive, luxurious-looking bed that seemed entirely out of place in the bioorganic ship. The room itself looked more like an extravagant alien bedroom than any kind of command center. There was even a strange pool filled with some kind of glowing amber liquid bubbling gently in the corner. "And what's with the pool?" Rex exclaimed, pointing at it. Is this some kind of spa?" He laughed clearly, amused by his reaction. "Oh, don't be silly, darling. This is the bridge. The bed is for us, and the amber pool is for... well, let's just say it's for relaxation." Rex stared at her, utterly baffled. "Relaxation? You replied with a cheerful nod. "You'll understand it later." Rex shook his head, muttering to himself. Of course the bridge is a bedroom. Why wouldn't it be? That's totally normal. "Darling," Wise called out in her usual playful tone, patting the strange, organic-looking bed. "Come get into the bed. We're about to open the wormhole, and I doubt you want to be sent flying into the wall. As you know, we don't have energy shields, so you'll be feeling some of the wormhole pressure once we're inside it." Rex raised an eyebrow, glancing at her skeptically. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious," Wise said cheerfully, patting the bed again. With a reluctant groan, Rex made a small jump onto the bed, landing with a soft squish. His face twisted in discomfort as the bed sank slightly beneath his weight, the sensation oddly warm and alive. "Don't tell me," he muttered, trying to ignore the goosebumps running up his arms. "This bed is also part of the ship, isn't it?" "Of course it is," Wise said, puffing up her chest with pride. "Everything you see and hear is part of me. Well, part of my ship, which is an extension of me. It's the result of hundreds of years of genetic modifications and fine-tuning. Amazing, isn't it?" Rex grimaced, doing his best to shove the mental image of himself lying on a giant organ out of his mind. "Amazing isn't exactly the word I'd use," he muttered under his breath. Wise, clearly oblivious to his discomfort, climbed onto the bed beside him and wrapped her arms around him. "Don't be shy, darling. The bed is nice and soft, isn't it?" "Yeah, if I ignore the fact that it feels like I'm lying on a big intestine, sure," Rex replied dryly, shifting uncomfortably. Before Wise could respond, a low hum began reverberating through the ship as it prepared to enter the wormhole. The organic walls pulsed faintly, and the lights dimmed as the massive bio-organic vessel aligned itself. The sensation was strange and alien, like the ship itself was alive and bracing for impact. When the destroyer entered the wormhole, Rex immediately felt the intense pressure against his body, like a gravitational force pulling him in multiple directions at once. But to his surprise, it wasn't unbearable. "Huh," Rex muttered to himself, adjusting slightly on the squishy bed. "This isn't so bad. I thought it would feel worse." Wise giggled from beside him, her chin resting on his shoulder. "That's because you're not a normal human anymore, silly. Your body's far stronger than it used to be. If a regular human were exposed to this level of pressure, they'd, well..." She paused, her grin turning mischievous. "Let's just say they'd make a great plate of spaghetti." Rex blinked, his face hidden behind his helmet, but he let out an audible groan. "Yeah, thanks for that lovely mental image." After several hours of traveling through the wormhole, the ship finally emerged on the other side, arriving at their destination, the Hanarix sector. Rex sat up and climbed off the bed, eager to get away from its unsettlingly squishy surface. He made his way toward one of the massive windows of the destroyer, which wasn't made of glass but rather a strange translucent membrane that pulsed faintly with the ship's movements. What he saw outside left him momentarily speechless. The entire sector was alive with activity, a vast expanse filled with the swarming forces of the Chrysari. Thousands upon thousands of bio-organic ships filled the void, each one unique in size and form. Some were small and dart-like, swarming like a school of predatory fish, while others were larger, hulking vessels that moved with a slow, deliberate grace. It was an overwhelming sight, like watching a hive of wasps, each one lethal in its own right. But what truly caught Rex's attention were the hive mind's supercapital ships. Floating in the distance were two colossal vessels, each an awe-inspiring 15 kilometers in diameter. Their spherical shapes bristled with protruding spines, extending outward in irregular patterns like starfish. Their exoskeletons were a dark, bone-like material, jagged, and organic in structure. Glowing green cracks spread across their surfaces, pulsing faintly like veins carrying some kind of energy through their massive frames. They didn't look like ships. They looked like small planets that had been transformed into horrifying war machines. What the hell? Rex muttered, his voice low. He stepped closer to the window, staring in awe at the supercapital ships. The sheer size of them was staggering. Nothing in his fleet or even the megacorps could compare to something on this scale. Those are the Chrysari Pride and Joy, Wise said as she came up behind him, her voice unusually soft. The Kragnarok-class planet devourer. They're the Queen's personal vessels, built over centuries. Each one is capable of wiping out an entire star system on its own. Rex turned his head slightly to look at her. You're saying those things can destroy entire systems? She nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. But don't worry, darling. They're not here to destroy anything today. Mother doesn't like wasting their energy unless it's absolutely necessary. Rex let out a small breath, turning back to look at the ships. Good to know, he said dryly. As the destroyer began its approach to one of the super capitals, Rex could see even more of the Chrysari forces spread across the sector. There were fleets of bio-ships that moved in perfect synchronicity, defensive swarms circling the Kragnarok-class planet devourer like living shields. The sheer coordination and unity of the Chrysari forces were both impressive and deeply unsettling. Welcome to my home, Wise said with a grin, resting her chin on his shoulder again. Mother's waiting. Rex stared out the window, the weight of what he was about to face settling over him. Yeah, he muttered. This is going to be fun. The moment YS's living destroyer entered the hangar bay of one of the Chrysari supercapital ships, Rex couldn't help but feel like an ant in the presence of titanic gods. The sheer scale of the hangar was overwhelming. It stretched endlessly in every direction, its walls pulsating faintly with a green bioluminescent glow. Every living organism here seemed insanely large, far surpassing anything Rex had encountered before. Thousands of Chrysari of varying sizes and shapes filled the hangar, their forms darting through the air or lumbering across the ground with precision and purpose. Even the smallest creatures Rex could spot were massive, standing at least 4 or 5 meters tall. The largest ones, hulking monstrosities covered in thick, chitinous armor, were more akin to walking skyscrapers, their every step shaking the organic floor. But despite the overwhelming size and power of everything around them, Rex noticed something odd. None of these terrifying creatures dared to cross YS's path. Every Chrysari they passed either stepped aside, flew higher, or outright froze as if trying to avoid her altogether. Even those that were much larger and undoubtedly more powerful seemed to shrink under her presence. Wise, Rex muttered, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and caution as his gaze followed a massive Chrysari scuttling out of their way. What did you do to these cute and poor massive destruction beasts to make them stay the hell away from you? Wise tilted her head, feigning innocence as she walked beside him in her humanoid form. What makes you assume I did something? She replied while puffing out her cheeks and lightly punching Rex's chest, though her punch had no strength at all, more of a playful gesture. Rex chuckled, patting her on the head as he shook his own. Oh, come on, I know how much of a little devil you can be. It wouldn't surprise me if you traumatized half the swarm just for fun. HMPH. She pouted while crossing her arms. Just so you know, I did nothing. It's just that they can feel my mom's pressure on me, she explained, her voice growing more cute. They instinctively understand who I am, and since everyone here is connected to her, no one would dare go against her orders. As Wise spoke, one particularly large Chrysari lumbered past them. It was a grotesque tier-4 monstrosity, easily over 10 meters tall, its heavy exoskeleton covered in glowing fissures of green light. It radiated raw power, the kind that would normally make even Rex wary. Wise, however, simply reached out and gave the towering beast a sharp spank on its armored hindquarters. The creature froze mid-step, shuddered violently, and then scurried away as fast as its massive limbs could carry it. See, Wise said with a radiant smile, looking as though she'd just completed the easiest task in the world. Rex blinked in disbelief, his brain trying to process what he'd just witnessed. He could feel the immense power radiating from the creature Wise had just casually smacked, something that would normally be considered suicidal. Yet here she was, acting like it was no big deal. Yes, I see, Rex said carefully, his gaze following the retreating Tier 4. And I'm just throwing this out there, but maybe you should refrain from spanking anyone else while we're here. Why? Wise asked innocently, tilting her head. Rex gestured vaguely toward the creatures around them, his voice lowering. Because, unlike you, I don't have your mom's pressure on me. To these guys, I'm basically a walking, delicious-looking snack. And I don't feel like being eaten today, if you know what I mean. Wise giggled, ignoring his caution entirely. Oh, come on, Rex, relax. This is my home. There's nothing that can go wrong here, she said cheerfully as she leapt onto Rex's back again, wrapping her arms around his neck and becoming his backpack once more. Rex's eyes widened in alarm. And now you've done it. That was absolutely a death flag, he shouted dramatically, throwing his arms in the air. Wise laughed, clearly enjoying herself as they bantered. But their playful moment was cut short when Rex noticed something that made his chest tighten with unease. Several Chrysari, different from the others in the hangar, were approaching them. These creatures were smaller than the hulking beasts Rex had seen earlier, but they were far more imposing. Their sleek, chitinous bodies were covered in intricate patterns of glowing green veins, and their eyes burned with an unnatural intensity. Unlike the other Chrysari, who seemed to exude raw brute force, these warriors carried an air of precision and intelligence, their movements calculated and deliberate. Wise, Rex said slowly, his voice tinged with caution. Yes, darling, Wise replied sweetly, still clinging to his back. Who are those guys? Rex asked while pointing at the approaching warriors with a small, nervous gesture. Ys's playful demeanor shifted slightly as she climbed off Rex's back, her expression becoming a bit more serious. Oh, them, she said casually, brushing off her dress. Those are my mother's sons. Rex stiffened, his instincts immediately going on high alert. Her sons, he repeated, his voice low and cautious. Yup, Wise said with a slight grin, stepping behind Rex and peeking over his shoulder as though she were hiding. The sight of Wise, the ever-confident, carefree Wise, hiding behind him made Rex tense even further. Wait a second, he muttered, glancing back at her. Why the hell are you hiding? You're her actual daughter, aren't you? Well, technically, yes, Wise admitted, her voice unusually quiet. But they're, my mom's sons from when she was still a princess. They were made before I was, so they're technically my older brothers. And what? Rex prompted, his nerves on edge. And they're kind of possessive about her, Wise said sheepishly, avoiding his gaze. Rex turned back toward the approaching warriors, his body instinctively tensing as they stopped a few meters away. Their eyes locked onto him with a piercing intensity, their expressions unreadable but unmistakably hostile. Well, this is going to be fun, Rex muttered under his breath. Well, look who we have here, the Chrysari champion said, his voice oozing mockery as he stepped forward, coming to a halt just a meter away from Rex and Wise. His piercing green eyes scanned them with clear disdain, his mandibles clicking slightly as if he were holding back laughter. The champion was humanoid in shape but distinctly alien in appearance. His 4 legs, jointed like those of an insect, supported his tall, imposing frame, and his carapace-covered back glistened under the faint bioluminescent glow of the hangar. A pair of translucent wings peeked out from beneath his armored shell, twitching faintly as though anticipating battle. Behind him, the other 9 Chrysari champions also arrived, each similarly humanoid but with varying features. Some had additional arms, some had fewer, while others had limbs shaped like jagged blades. Each of them radiated the raw, predatory presence of a Tier 6 being. The champion's glowing green eyes flicked dismissively to Wise, and his mandibles curled into a smirk. And for the mother's sake, what is that horrendous appearance you're using right now, Ysera? His tone was full of mockery, his wings twitching with amusement. He leaned forward slightly, his face inches from hers. And what's this? Weren't you already a Tier 3 being the last time I saw you? How is it that you've regressed back to Tier 2? Not only are you uglier than before, but now you're even more useless. He laughed cruelly, the sound echoing through the massive hangar. Ha 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 ha. No wonder mother sent you away like the failed experiment you are. Wise didn't respond immediately. Her usual carefree demeanor was gone, replaced with a stoic expression as she stood her ground behind Rex. She didn't flinch under the champion's verbal assault, but Rex could see the subtle tension in her body, the way her fingers twitched slightly as if holding back the urge to retaliate. The champion's laugh grew louder, almost maniacal, as he pointed at Wise with one of his clawed hands. Tell me, little sister, he said mockingly, his voice dripping with venom. What's next? Are you going to regress to Tier 1 and start licking the dirt beneath our feet? Ha! You might as well crawl back to whatever gutter mother dumped you in. The laughter stopped abruptly with the sharp, mechanical sound of a shotgun being reloaded. The champion's glowing eyes snapped to Rex, his wings stilling as he noticed the plasma shotgun aimed squarely at his head. Rex's voice cut through the hangar like a blade. I don't know who you are or what rank you have here, he said, his tone low and menacing, but the one you're insulting is my wife. So I'd really appreciate it if you. He raised the shotgun slightly, steadying his aim directly at the champion's forehead. Shut the fuck up and step away from my girl. The hangar fell into a tense silence. The champion's mandibles twitched in surprise for a brief moment, but then his expression shifted into something more sinister. His wings spread slightly, glowing faintly as his towering frame loomed over Rex. And what are you going to do with that toy, human? The champion sneered, his voice full of contempt. Do you even realize where you are? Who you're pointing that thing at? His green eyes glinted with amusement as his mandibles curved into a sharp grin. You're a little insect standing in a hive of giants, and you think you can bark orders at me? Rex didn't budge. His stance was steady, the shotgun unwavering in his grip. I don't care if you're a giant, a god, or the queen herself, he growled. What you will do is stop insulting my wife, or I swear to God, I'll paint this hangar with whatever color your blood is. The champion's smile faltered for a split second, but it returned quickly as he let out a deep, guttural chuckle. Bold words, little human, he said while taking a single step closer. The barrel of the shotgun was now almost pressed against his forehead. But do you have the guts to pull the trigger? Do you really think you'll live long enough to see the aftermath? Wise, who had remained silent up until now, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost amused, but carried an underlying sharpness. I wouldn't test him if I were you, Tikaltar. Tikaltar turned his gaze to Wise, his mandibles twitching in irritation. And why is that, little sister? He asked mockingly. Wise smirked, stepping out from behind Rex and crossing her arms. Because Rex isn't like anyone you've dealt with before. He doesn't bluff. Rex tilted his head slightly, his golden eyes gleaming behind his helmet. She's right, you know, he said. The last guy who called my bluff. Let's just say he didn't live long enough to regret it. Tikaltar's mandibles clicked as he considered his options, his gaze shifting between Rex and Wise. The tension in the air was palpable, and the other Chrysari champions behind him seemed to be watching intently, their glowing eyes flicking between the three figures in front of them. Tikaltar let out a sneer, his mandibles twitching with disdain. Do it, he said mockingly, his glowing green eyes boring into Rex as if daring him. Go ahead, human. I know you're kind. I've eaten some of you from time to time, survivors from wars, stragglers from destroyed fleets. Every single one of them was pathetic, useless trash that. Before Tikaltar could finish his sentence, the sharp crack of a shotgun echoed through the hangar. Rex had pulled the trigger. The plasma shot hit Tikaltar squarely in the face at point-blank range. Ordinarily, a plasma blast like that wouldn't even tickle a Tier 6 Chrysari, as their bodies were reinforced with energy harnessed from stellar cores. But Tikaltar had made the fatal error of assuming Rex wouldn't actually fire. He hadn't braced himself, and the unexpected impact caused him to stagger slightly. The burn mark on his face wasn't deep, but it was enough to leave a blackened scorch across his otherwise pristine exoskeleton. Tikaltar stood there silently for a moment, his towering form eerily still. Slowly, he raised a hand to his face, brushing away the smoke and wiping the burn mark with deliberate precision. His expression didn't show pain, it was more disbelief. The champions behind him shifted uneasily, their eyes narrowing as they watched the exchange, but none dared to step forward. Tukaltar finally lowered his hand and looked back at Rex, who was still standing in the same spot, the shotgun still raised. Rex hadn't moved an inch, and his helmeted gaze remained locked onto the Chrysari champion. The tension in the air was suffocating. Tukaltar's mandibles twitched as he let out a low, guttural growl. "While I would very much like to end you for that little stunt," he said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "Mother's orders were to escort you and that trash." He flicked his gaze briefly to Wise, to her. "So, be glad, human. You get to live another day." He turned sharply on his heel, his wings twitching with restrained anger, and made a hand signal to his fellow champions. The gesture was unmistakable, it was a command for Rex to follow them. As the group began moving toward the Queen's chambers, Wise walked beside Rex, looking up at him with sparkling eyes that practically radiated admiration. "Darling, since when were you more of a devil than I am?" she asked with her voice full of awe. Her expression was so exaggerated that there were practically little stars in her eyes. Rex let out a nervous chuckle, lowering the plasma shotgun and absorbing back the nanomaterials. "I'll be honest," he muttered while glancing at her. "I think I shit myself the second I pulled the trigger. Good thing this suit doesn't let the smell out." Wise giggled while wrapping herself around his arm like a playful child. "You're amazing," she said, giving him an affectionate squeeze. But then, as if casually mentioning the weather, she added, "Oh, by the way, my brothers are directly connected to my mother's hive mind. Sue, she probably saw that little show just now." Rex stopped dead in his tracks. He could feel his blood turn cold as he slowly turned his head to look at Wise. "Wait, are you telling me your mother saw me trying to blow her son's head off?" "Yup," Wise said with a silly laugh, her innocent grin almost infuriatingly carefree. Rex's shoulders slumped slightly as he muttered under his breath, "Oh, I am so dead." "Hee hee. Don't worry, darling," Wise said, patting his arm reassuringly. "Mother doesn't really care about fights between her sons. She can just make more of them anytime she wants, you know. She only cares about the greater good of the swarm. Losing one or two sons doesn't make much of a difference to her." Rex let out a long, exasperated sigh, running a hand down his helmeted face. "Yeah, real reassuring. You're telling me she doesn't care if I kill one of her kids? Great. That's not terrifying at all." Wise giggled again, clearly enjoying his discomfort. But her playful demeanor shifted slightly when Rex asked his next question. "So, I remember I heard somewhere that a Chrysari queen can only produce one daughter in her entire lifetime," Rex said, his tone curious but cautious. "Does that make you her favorite or something? Is that why these guys hate you so much? Are they just jealous because you're her golden child?" Ys's smile dimmed for a moment, her gaze lowering slightly. "Not exactly," she said quietly. "What they said before was true, you know. I was a failed experiment for her." Rex frowned, his curiosity piqued, but his heart tugged slightly at her tone. "What do you mean?" Wise took a deep breath before explaining. "When I was created, Mother used the genes of a void creature that she and my aunts defeated after years of fighting. It was supposed to create a being that could reach unimaginable power. A perfect mix of void and Chrysari traits. But what she got was me." She gestured to herself with a weak smile. "I can barely reach tier 3. That's nothing compared to what she hoped for. In her eyes, I'm a disappointment. A failed experiment." Rex looked at her, unsure of what to say. But before he could respond, Ys's smile returned in full force. "But enough about me," she said cheerfully, pointing ahead of them. "We're almost at Mother's chambers." Rex followed her gaze, and his eyes widened slightly at the sight before him. In the distance, the Queen's chamber loomed like an alien fortress. It was a massive, spherical structure that dwarfed even the colossal Chrysari ships around it. The chamber was surrounded by thousands of Chrysari of all sizes and forms, each one patrolling with a precision that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unnerving. The sphere itself pulsed faintly with green light, its surface covered in organic, bone-like structures that twisted outward like jagged spines. "That's impressive," Rex muttered while staring at the gargantuan structure. Wise grinned, leaning against him playfully. Told you. Mother always makes an entrance. As they approached the entrance to the Queen's chamber, Rex couldn't help but feel his pulse quicken. The sheer size of the structure was daunting enough, but it was the two massive figures stationed in front of the entrance that made him instinctively tighten his grip. The doorkeepers were unlike anything Rex had encountered before. They stood at nearly 15 meters tall, their grotesque, insectoid frames covered in thick, gleaming black exoskeletons that radiated a faint green glow through jagged cracks. Their 6 limbs were built for destruction, 2 massive arms wielded long, spear-like weapons that pulsed with an ominous energy, while their lower limbs looked like they could crush steel beams with ease. Each of their heads was adorned with massive, curved horns, and their glowing, predatory eyes scanned the approaching group with cold precision. As soon as the champions group and Rex came within a certain distance of the entrance, the doorkeepers moved. With deliberate, thunderous steps, they advanced forward, blocking the path. The sound of their heavy limbs meeting the organic ground reverberated through the hangar. They crossed their energy spears in front of the group in one smooth motion, the tips of the weapons humming with dangerous power. Rex froze in his tracks, his instincts screaming at him to be on high alert. His suit's scanners activated almost instantly, analyzing the immense energy readings emanating from the doorkeepers. Scan complete. Threat level. Tier 6 peak. Warning. Individuals detected possess stellar energy manipulation and enhanced organic durability. Combat is not recommended without appropriate support. Rex's breath hitched slightly. These weren't just guards, they were some of the strongest beings he had ever seen. If he made one wrong move, these doorkeepers could end him before he even had time to react. The champions accompanying Rex stopped in unison, their movements calm and rehearsed, as if this were a routine occurrence for them. One of the Chrysari champions stepped forward, and it was Takaltar. "We are here under the orders of the Hive Queen," Takaltar said, his voice firm but respectful as he addressed the towering guards. The doorkeepers tilted their massive heads slightly, their glowing eyes narrowing as they processed his words. But they didn't move their spears. Instead, one of them spoke, its voice deep and guttural, vibrating through the air like the rumble of an earthquake. "The human," it growled, its massive, chitinous face turning toward Rex. "Step forward." Rex stiffened, his muscles tensing. The weight of the Tier 6 creature's gaze felt suffocating, like he was being crushed under an invisible force. "Well, darling," Wise said from beside him, her usual playful tone doing little to hide the slight edge of nervousness in her voice. "Looks like they want to have a chat with you." Rex shot her a sidelong glance, his voice low. "What kind of chat involves 2 walking tanks blocking my path with spears?" Wise giggled, though it was clear she was trying to ease the tension. "Don't worry, they just want to assess you. Think of it as a little test." "A test?" Rex muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Great. I love tests. They're so much fun." Still, Rex knew he didn't have much choice. The doorkeeper's massive frames loomed over him, their unblinking eyes locked onto his every move. If he hesitated too long or showed any signs of weakness, it might be interpreted as an insult, or worse, a threat. Taking a deep breath, Rex stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the organic floor as he moved past Takaltar and the other champions. He could feel their eyes on him, but it was the oppressive gaze of the doorkeepers that made his skin crawl. As he stood directly in front of the 2 towering guardians, they lowered their spears slightly, the tips of the weapons humming faintly with energy. "You," the left doorkeeper rumbled, its voice resonating through Rex's very bones. "Are you worthy to stand before the Hive Queen?" Rex tilted his head slightly, his golden eyes narrowing behind his helmet. "I guess that depends on your definition of worthy, doesn't it?" he replied, his tone calm but firm. The right doorkeeper's mandibles twitched, emitting a faint clicking sound that Rex couldn't interpret. It leaned closer, its massive form casting a shadow over him. "We will decide." Without warning, both doorkeepers raised their spears high into the air. The energy at the tips flared brightly, and in an instant, a powerful field of energy surrounded Rex, isolating him from the rest of the group. Rex instinctively reached for his weapon, but before he could act, Ys's voice cut through the tension. "Relax, darling," she called out, still standing behind the champions. It's just a little pressure test. They want to see if you can handle it. No big deal. Rex grated his teeth. Yeah, easy for you to say. You're not the one trapped in an energy bubble. The doorkeepers slammed the butts of their spears into the ground, and suddenly, the energy field began to compress. Rex felt an immense pressure slam into his body, like the weight of a collapsing star bearing down on him. His suit's systems blared warnings in his HUD. Warning. Gravitational stress detected. Pressure levels are increasing. Structural integrity holding at 92%. Rex clenched his fists, his body straining against the pressure. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he held his ground. The thought of backing down or showing weakness in front of these towering creatures wasn't an option. The left doorkeeper tilted its head slightly, observing him closely. Impressive. Most would have already been reduced to pulp. The right doorkeeper clicked its mandibles again, and the energy field suddenly dissipated. The immense pressure vanished, leaving Rex standing there, breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. The left doorkeeper raised its spear and stepped aside, its booming voice echoing through the chamber. You may proceed. Rex straightened, his breathing steadying as he walked back toward Wise. She was grinning at him, her eyes sparkling with pride. See, told you it was no big deal. She said cheerfully, latching onto his arm. Yeah, no big deal, Rex muttered sarcastically. Just casually surviving an attempt to turn me into a pancake. As they passed through the now open entrance, Rex glanced back at the doorkeepers. They were watching him intently, their glowing eyes following his every step. Those guys are definitely not on my birthday party card list, Rex muttered under his breath, earning a giggle from Wise as they continued deeper into the Queen's chamber. As soon as Rex stepped inside the Queen's chambers, he immediately understood why the earlier test from the doorkeepers had been necessary. The immense pressure in the room hit him like a tidal wave, a force that made the air feel heavier, the walls seem closer, and every step feel like a battle against gravity itself. This was a level of energy unlike anything Rex had ever encountered before, an aura of power that seemed to warp the very space around it. Rex gritted his teeth, his armor straining slightly as he forced himself to move forward. His HUD was blaring multiple warnings in his vision, the words, extreme gravitational stress detected, flashing across the screen. Are you okay, darling? Wise asked, her usual teasing tone absent as she placed a hand on his arm to steady him. She was kneeling now, clearly accustomed to the weight of her mother's overwhelming presence. Rex, on the other hand, refused to kneel. His legs trembled slightly, his body straining against the invisible force trying to crush him, but his determination burned brighter than the pain. Don't worry, he said through clenched teeth, his voice unwavering. I'm good. Nothing's going to make me kneel. Not today, not ever, unless I'm dead. Let's just hope I don't die today. She gave him a small, worried smile but said nothing, her admiration for him shining through her expression. With each agonizing step, Rex forced his legs to move forward. The chamber stretched out before them, impossibly vast and ornate in its alien design. The organic walls shimmered faintly, pulsing with green bioluminescent light that seemed to mimic the rhythm of a heartbeat. Massive tendrils and spires rose from the floor and ceiling, creating a surreal, cathedral-like atmosphere. After several minutes of walking through the oppressive environment, they finally arrived at what appeared to be the Queen's throne, a massive, elevated platform carved directly from the organic structure of the chamber itself. It was adorned with intricate patterns of glowing green veins, resembling the circulatory system of a living being. And there she was. Rex's breath caught in his throat as he laid eyes on the Hive Queen for the first time. She was a towering figure, nearly 20 meters tall, her body exuding an aura of regal dominance and unparalleled power. Her shimmering, iridescent black exoskeleton reflected the dim light in eerie, shifting patterns, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Her elongated thorax and abdomen gave her a commanding presence, making her look like a living monument to both beauty and terror. Her legs, sharp and silver-like, clung to the edges of her throne with elegance and menace. Her wings, though folded neatly behind her, unfolded slightly as she stirred, revealing intricate translucent blue veins that glowed faintly, like the night sky etched onto fragile glass. Her head was crowned with a massive crest, giving her the appearance of royalty beyond comprehension. 6 glowing green eyes stared down at Rex, burning with intelligence, predatory cunning, and an almost supernatural awareness. Her long, elegant mandibles twitched faintly, a subtle reminder of her raw physical power. His scanners immediately flashed an alert in his HUD. Scan complete. Threat level. Tier 7 peak. Warning. Run. Rex's hands clenched slightly, his instincts screaming at him to leave, to run, to escape this overwhelming presence. But he stood his ground, even as every fiber of his being told him he was standing in front of a living god.